Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 166 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor, show by show, from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-host, Matt Feuerstein, and today we have another returning guest. You might remember them. We're paying it back because they really deserved something better, because you might remember, I believe the last time this guest was on a show, they reviewed maybe the worst show we have ever covered on ThROH The Years with The Bitter End. So it is great to have them back as kind of a make good, a spiritual make good. Albert Ching, it is great to have you back on ThROH The Years finally to rectify that slight.
Yes, it's great to be here with my two wonderful pals of many decades. And, it is surprising to me that The Bitter End has that reputation among the both of you as one of the worst shows ever, because, obviously I went to it and recall having a good time, but then I think about it, I think I was having a good time because I was there with my wonderful pal Matt. And I think that's why I look back on it so fondly, despite the in-ring contents.
Yeah, could any show be bad if you're with Matt?
Well, I honestly all the listeners of this podcast know the answer to that question. I felt bad, not that we had him on for that show, but because sometimes reviewing a bad show is actually fun. But I felt bad that he came all the way out to New York just to watch one of the worst shows we'd ever gone to. So it was very important to me that he came back the following year and went to this wonderful Glory by Honor weekend, an epic weekend of Japanese legends of professional wrestling. Thank you, Albert, for coming on the show, and we've missed you very much. And we wish you were on every episode. And
wow,
I just think that this is the way things should be.
Yeah, it feels right.
So before each episode, we usually go into what happened in the news in Ring of Honor between the last show we covered and the current show. We just have a couple stories, but one's pretty significant. But the first one, and then we'll get to the show, but the first one, Matt, I thought was interesting was, it's not really a news story, but it was something that Meltzer wrote at this time in The Observer, and it was like an interesting thing to come across. Dave wrote this in the TNA section of The Observer at this time, where he got into this conversation about how this might shock people, TNA's booking at times in its history wasn't considered great. And so Dave was talking about it, and he happened to start talking about ROH during it. So he wrote, the mindset here in TNA is what Gabe Sapolsky does wouldn't work for the masses, but after 5 years, it amazes me they haven't at least spoken to him. I find it very difficult to believe he wouldn't be a huge improvement, and among people who have worked for both him and this group, I'm not alone in that thinking, but he's got to be under contract to ROH. I believe there probably was a time they could have gotten him, and I know people in the company who pushed for them to talk with him, and nothing ever transpired. At least they'd have been the alternative group that was real good at what it did do, and who is to say with more money at his disposal, better production of television, and television that reaches close to 2 million people in its 2 airings per week, that he couldn't be successful. But that ship has sailed for a while. So...
Well, the funny thing is that in a year, Gabe would be available, and I don't know. I guess maybe we'll find out that I'm wrong, but I do not recall him TNA knocking on his door. Do you?
No, and I would guess that. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they the word on Gabe was always, oh yeah, he can book this indie promotion, but could he book U.S. style mainstream TV that's more over the top and wacky and more promos? And there was a thought that maybe Gabe could, and then you watch Modern Evolve and you think maybe not. But
I think that the idea that Meltzer was going for was like, okay, yeah, maybe he couldn't book Modern with wrestling that was more wacky, but like good, like they don't do that, So I don't know.
I have to think that people championing him here were probably like AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels and Samoa Joe, right? When he talks about people that were like suggesting that they should talk to Gabe, I would imagine those have to be the people
for sure.
Maybe Alex Shelley never got the great push in ROH, so maybe he's like, you know what, maybe keep Gabe over in ROH.
Not that he was getting such a great push in TNA either. I mean, he had some good tag team runs, but he wasn't really a main eventer until many years later.
Yeah, and so our only other story before we get to the show is kind of an amazing story where Obviously the show we're covering today and the show we're going to cover on the next episode are Mitsuharu Misawa's first and only shows for ROH here in the United States of America, the great country we all love. And the crazy thing is, people might forget or not even know, is that 1 week before this show, Misawa wrestled Samoa Joe in Japan. And so we'll go first to, there's two stories. I'll go first to the Observer one Dave wrote before the match ever happened, and he kind of gives the setup. And then I'll go to the one where he talks about what happened after the match. And I feel like it's an interesting story that's kind of related to ROH, but also it is a good setup for the show because it helps you understand just what kind of situation Misawa and Pro Wrestling Noah were in at this point. So we'll go to this first Observer story was Dave talking about where the September 19th, 2007 Budokan Hall show that Pro Wrestling Noah ran, they made the announcement there that Samoa Joe will be main eventing the next show in October against Misawa. So Dave wrote, Pro Wrestling Noah announced the debut of Samoa Joe, and in announcing him as headline Budokan Hall on October 27th, gave a Japanese affirmation as to the idea that ROH and or TNA can create a foreigner who is able to main event Budokan. At this point, Joe is only booked for those 2 dates, but TNA is open for booking him to Noah for future dates. I don't believe Noah has any foreigner who wasn't self-created by the Japanese system, or has had any foreigner who wasn't self-created by the Japanese system or from the old school days challenge for the title at a Budokan Hall main event. Joe has now actually had several years of being a top star with his long ROH title reign and the past 2 years being one of TNA's biggest stars. He gained a lot of credibility in 2005 with the Noah audience as Kenta Kobashi's opponent in a Match of the Year winner on ROH soil. Joe challenges for the GHC title, which will almost certainly be against Mitsuharu Misawa. Joe is only working 2 dates on the next tour rather than the entire tour, so they're positioning him like the old-time American superstar from the 60s through the 80s who would only come in for the last few days of a tour, something Noah hasn't really done for anyone in years. So yeah, this was Noah kind of doing something very different for them in this period. And it did not turn out great, because we'll jump to the future with Dave here, and he talks after this match happened. Dave writes in the Noah section, however, the October 27th show was a sad reminder of how far the business has fallen. It was noted that a new monthly magazine covering wrestling in Japan did an exclusive cover story interview with Kento Kobashi, and sales were terrible. The advance for Budokan Hall, headlined by Misawa defending the GHC title against Samoa Joe, was weak. When the match was announced at the September 19th Budokan Hall show, there was a gasp and a big pop since Joe had never worked for Noah, although his matches with Kobashi and Takeshi Morishima in Ring of Honor had aired on television in Japan. The announcement last week that Kobashi would return to the site of most of his most famous matches and announce his return was hoped to spur a late rush of ticket sales. However, due to a massive typhoon in Tokyo, only about 7,000 people were at the show, announced as 14,000 to save face, one of the smallest Budokan Hall crowds in company history. Of course, Kobashi got the monster reaction from those who were there, and Kobashi said he returned as a pro wrestler and announced his match. Takayama, Akiyama, and Misawa all shook hands with him. There was still hope Kobashi's return would lead to a sellout on December 2nd, which would be the first sellout of Budokan Hall in 1 year since the night Misawa regained the GHC title from Naomichi Marufuji. Tickets for December 2nd were put on sale that night, and with 7,000 people there, they sold 6,000 tickets. Misawa versus Joe was generally considered a disappointment. It wasn't a bad match, but by no means a dream match. Joe, a student of Japanese wrestling, used a lot of classic moves of famous Japanese wrestlers. Misawa came back with the Emerald Frozen and a running elbow to the back of the head for the pin in 17 minutes, 14 seconds. The crowd was hot in the last few minutes, but didn't pop for the finish, as they didn't believe that was the end. Misawa is just too physically beaten up to do this level of singles match. The problem is, with Kobashi out of action, nobody else could draw with the title on top, so he was thrust back at a default role as the star when the Marufuji versus Kenta match bombed at the box office. But the inevitable is that in a company built around the classic world title match, going back to Misawa when he can't deliver that match was going to run its course. The big question is is the wrestling business so far gone that Kobashi's return won't bring fans back? And more, what does Kobashi have left? So, yeah, that was the that was the thing that I think people need to. I'll talk about more later, but Masao was, unlike a lot of the other Japanese legends ROH brought in at this time, he was not seen as like, oh, he's definitely going to have a good match. It was almost like, what kind of match is he even going to have in the state that he's in? And yeah, and Noah was in a decline here in business, and it was not going great for them. And so an interesting time for them. I don't know if you have any thoughts, but
Well, I remember watching the Samoa Joe and Misawa match at the time, and yes, finding it to be a bit of a disappointment. And yeah, I remember being apprehensive about what Misawa would be in the ROH setting. I think, people that weren't paying a ton of attention to Noah at the time, but knew Misawa's reputation, were maybe expecting a repeat of Kobashi, and it was just obviously a very different situation. Misawa obviously less than 2 years away from his death, and
which we didn't know at the time.
yes, I was.
That was not something that I think you probably factored in.
No,
About the match.
most people did not consider that when they were analyzing what could be. But seriously, like he wasn't gonna be able to do what Kobashi did, and the crowd did not react to him the way they reacted to Kobashi. Probably would have been different had it been 5 years earlier, but it wasn't. So this was a different situation for sure. But still, I think was very intriguing to a lot of people.
I mean, he was just he's like 45, right? He was a lot older than Kobashi was.
Yeah, older than Kobashi, although younger than almost every main eventer in professional wrestling today. I'm just kidding, but younger than several of them, definitely.
Younger than some of them for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's funny. It's not funny, but if we joke about Misawa, as everyone does, it's such a fun topic. But you talk about, we didn't know that Misawa was going to die. Strangely enough, the only person that seemed to have an inkling that he could die at this time might have been Misawa, because when doing research for this, and I think I had known this before but forgotten it. Misawa, they said around a couple years before he died, so it might have been right around this time, wrote a letter to be delivered in the case he died in the ring to his opponent on that night saying, don't blame yourself. It's on me. So like, if you're writing a letter 2 years before your death, basically like, in the event I die during a match, give this to make whoever wrestled me feel better, you're probably not feeling great at this time. Like that's a pretty insane thing to do.
Maybe that's why they made sure that Misawa only wrestled Japanese wrestlers on this show, because they didn't want to make let's say Hallowicked feel bad for doing that on a
there wasn't a good Google
soil.
Translate back then. It would have been hard for them to read the letter. So
yeah. This is not something I feel comfortable joking about, but
on that note,
it's just not too soon. Maybe still too soon. I don't know.
We'll save that through the years reunion show in 20 years where we re-review all our old episodes. But and that brings us to the show today. Glory by Honor 6, Night 1. It took place November 2nd, 2007 at the Pennsylvania National Guard Armory in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in front of a reported crowd of 1,000 fans. And ROH was really hoping for a big crowd on this one, and they did pretty well. Dave wrote in The Observer that ROH expected their biggest crowd ever in Philadelphia to see Mitsuharu Misawa on this day. And then when the show happened, Dave followed up by saying, billed as a weekend of Budokan Hall-style main events, the November 2nd show in Philadelphia drew 1,000 fans, which was right with the Cage of Death event last year as the biggest crowd they had ever drawn.
I am pretty sure there were more people at Cage of Death. I mean, not that this wasn't a good crowd, but that definitely felt bigger to me.
Yeah. Although Dave will add, he feels like this is more impressive because Philadelphia is tougher to draw on a Friday night. And this was a Friday night show compared to, I believe, Cage of Death was a Saturday.
Yes.
But yeah, I do believe Cage of Death drew more, because even Dave in The Observer was like, Cage of Death drew close to 1,100 fans. So CZW is a bigger draw than Mitsuharu Misawa. That is a historical fact now. No context needed. Yeah, it is still like I think a good crowd and for Philadelphia, definitely. So next up we'll go to the Pro Wrestling Torch, who they wrote in the Torch at the time. Regarding Misawa's appearances during the upcoming Glory by Honor weekend, ROH Booker Gabe Sapolsky tells PW Torch he was overwhelmed when he heard Noah's ideas for Misawa's matches in Philadelphia and Manhattan. Quote, I was really overwhelmed when Noah came to me with the match ideas for Misawa, he says. I never dreamed they would give us such big matches for the United States. Misawa really wants to make an impression on the ROH fans. He wants to make his legacy in the United States on these shows. I think it will be something special for everyone. So, yeah, that's the other thing. Where the other matches where Japanese legends came to ROH, it felt like, oh, ROH was booking these guys. And this was Noah coming to him and saying, these are the matches we're prepared to offer you. All Noah. And I think it worked out. A couple other quick news notes, and then we'll get to the show. PW Insider wrote, the entire Pro Wrestling Noah contingent will also be doing autographs at intermission, with Mitsuharu Misawa priced at $20 and Kenta, Takeshi Morishima, and Naomichi Marufuji priced at $10 each. So you wanted Misawa, an extra $10. Have either of you ever bought an autograph at a wrestling show?
I have not.
I have not either, although both of us could have at this wrestling show because we were both there.
I had the awkward experience once of someone was in the ring at intermission for a wrestling show and they were going to sell autographs and no one wanted one. And so he just randomly struck up a conversation with me during the entire intermission while he was in the ring and I was staying outside. And it was just like this thing where I couldn't tell if he was trying to just get me wanting to buy an autograph from him or not. But I was like, I wanted to like get snacks or talk to somebody else. And I was just standing there talking to this guy. And
was it Batista? It was Batista, wasn't it?
No, it was an indie wrestler that has now been canceled, I will just say. And not a notable one either, but... all
right. I'm going to choose to think it was Dave Batista.
Definitely. And finally, our last note, the PW Torch wrote that Mike Quackenbush has been pulled from the November 2nd event.
Speaking of indie wrestlers who have been canceled.
Due to a head injury. Quack was supposed to wrestle Roderick Strong on the show, and instead he doesn't get to wrestle in ROH for the rest of the year because he had been dealing, I think, with a big concussion. But that brings us to the show. And we open with interviewer Rebecca Bayless in the building before the show. She has some bad news for us. Nigel McGuinness has suffered a torn bicep. She points out that he's signing autographs for the fans, and she walks over to him while he's doing that to ask him how he's doing. Nigel says he tore his bicep completely off the bone, saying that all the lariats he's thrown has weakened his tendon. He points out his healthy arm what muscles he tore and says that to repair it surgically, they'd actually have to go under another muscle to get to it and fix it. Sounds very complicated and involved. The end of the tendon, he says, looks like a mop head from all the damage dealt to it. And his doctor told him there's no guarantee that surgery would even work and it would put him out for 4 months. So his docs suggest instead of getting surgery, don't get the surgery, let it heal on its own for a month, form scar tissue, and see maybe you can just keep on going the way it is if you let the scar tissue form and kind of settle things in place. Nigel says he appreciates the fans at ROH for sticking by him, and it kills him that he can't work a show like tonight's, which comes along once in a lifetime having Misawa here. But Nigel says he wants a long time with this belt, not one more match. And this will be like the last time we get to enjoy Nigel earnestly saying, I'd like to thank the ROH fans for all the support.
Yeah. How much do you think his description of his medical problem was a shoot, and how much wasn't? Like, do you think everything he said was entirely accurate to what the diagnosis was?
It was very detailed.
Yeah, it was to the point where I had a hard time following it, honestly. But
I think it was probably true because, I mean, that's what he did was he took some time off, although not really.
Not really.
Later, but he lowered his schedule and the intensity of the matches he worked, and then he kind of went back to full time a month later.
And just kept doing exactly what he was doing with his arm.
Yeah. And I believe he never got surgery on that bicep. So
yeah,
letting the scar. So, that's how I like to leave all my medical maladies. If I just ignore them for a month, I don't have to see a doctor and I don't have to worry about them ever again. So
usually
it's been working well for me. So what could go wrong? What could go wrong? And next week.
And look at Nigel now, one of the most pushed wrestlers in one of the biggest wrestling companies there is.
Exactly.
So
And
obviously he was playing the long game 19 years later.
Yeah, the very long game.
Yeah, and Albert, we have so many on this show. Time is a flat circle moments where things we were talking about on through the years happen to be happening again, right as we talk about it. And just as Nigel gets hurt during a key time in his career, it definitely looks like AEW is setting up Nigel to wrestle John Moxley in a big match in Wembley Arena. And Nigel McGuinness gets hurt bad enough that he has to work through it. It was in a walking boot last week, so. Things just never end. The wrestling has a few stories. They happen over and over again. Life is like that.
Is this more or less weird than like ROH putting on a Samoa Joe versus Jay Lethal match on pay-per-view and having a feud on AEW TV right as we were reviewing the ROH Samoa Joe versus Jay Lethal feud from 2005? Like, that was the weirdest, I think.
Yeah. But nothing that could be weird enough to top what we're about to see, which is okay. This,
I was going to talk to you about this before. I was like, should we just talk about all of these at once, or should we like pepper them in like they did?
I don't know if I can handle them all at once. So we have a segment that we go outside somewhere on the streets of Philly to find the age of the fall of Jimmy Jacobs, Necro Butcher, Tyler Black, and Lacey staying outside of Independence Hall. A graphic says that this footage is provided to us by ageofthefall.com. And it is hilarious to see Age of the Fall trying to look all emo while they're standing beside a bunch of tourists, especially since Jimmy Jacobs is wearing a cowboy hat along with his emo look. I wrote my notes, Goth Rooks over here. Jimmy says
very impressive, Trevor. That's one of the best.
Yeah,
puns
I was
I've ever
trying
seen.
to find the right way in on the cowboy hat, and I think you know.
Jimmy says their country was founded by people who 230 years ago were called insurgents. Jimmy asks where revolutions occur now. He says the people back then picked up guns. They didn't get on message boards and complain. They picked up guns, which I don't know. That seems like maybe progress, or maybe, I guess, you know what? Some people might say it's not progress. Who knows? But Jimmy says Age of the Fall bear arms. Tyler Black says that they fight for freedom. It's a fight within. Are you with us or are you against us? Jimmy says so many of us out here, us, at home on the internet, are against them because they make us think, and we hate thinking. Jimmy then steals Dusty Rhodes' classic "When You're a Walk Behind Her, the View Never Changes" line, which made me throw up a little in my mouth. Jimmy finishes by lighting a cigarette because he's cool. And this promo was that classic Age of the Fall combination of dorky, acting like it had high-minded ideas while actually being about nothing at all.
Yeah. Boy, how much of this was just like, what the fuck are they talking about? And I know for sure they have no idea what they're talking about. Like, that's my favorite aspect of it. I would say these things varied in levels of coherence. I don't think the first one was particularly coherent at all.
I feel like they get worse from here, but yeah.
Yeah, if you were to watch the show in a vacuum, you would think that the biggest feud in RH at this time was Age of the Fall versus ... society ? It begins and ends the show, and I think there's at least one in between. It's also very much like the Birthday Boys 3 Problems in America sketch.
This is why you need to be on every episode, Albert.
Yeah. You're not going to find another guest on a wrestling podcast that references the Birthday Boys. you would find us occasionally referencing Doughboys, but we wouldn't go that deep. We're not going as deep as an Albert Ching.
That's right.
Next up, we have a couple dark matches that you guys got to see. And as always, I am never going to do the horrors of asking a guest to remember a dark match that happened 15, 16 years ago, but there was two of them.
19 years ago, to be
19
fair.
years, good God. Alex Payne defeated Kyle Durden. Shane Hagedorn defeated Rhett Titus. 19 years ago. I'm sure you guys have no memories of those. And that brings us to the opener that everyone saw on DVD. El Generico and Kevin Steen defeated the Hangman 3 of BJ Whitmer and Brent Albright in 8 minutes, 52 seconds when Steen pinned Whitmer after a senton bomb. Matt, why don't you kick us off? What'd you think about this opener?
I began watching this with a pretty random thought, which is, I feel like, okay, so I was listening to the last week to the 20 podcast on Wrestling Playlist with Charles and Will. I don't know if you ever listened to that podcast, Trevor, but
Occasionally, yes.
yes, they were talking about when George Scott started booking the NWA in 1989, and he had these rules, and some of them, were seem pretty antiquated, and some of them are like, they should they should probably institute some of these rules now. And one of them was like in undercard matches, wrestlers should not leave the ring at all during the first half of the show. And I realize after watching every ROH show that the wrestlers use going outside the ring and throwing each other into the guardrails and like taking flip bumps into the guardrails as a really big crutch. And I've seen it so many times now. And it happened like right at the beginning of this match, and it happened in several other matches early in the show, that I'm just like, I almost am like, was ROH having those metal guardrails like that that made the big sound? Was that almost a hindrance to the product? Because it's very annoying how often they did that. And it was a completely random thought. No, nothing really specific to these wrestlers, but I just had the thought when I was watching this show, like, this is just a very repetitive, uninteresting spot where if you withheld it a little bit, it would actually seem pretty cool because it makes such a loud noise, but they do it in like every fucking match. Anyway, Trevor, do I sound like an insane person? I know to Albert I probably do, but you watch every show with me. Do you know what I mean?
Matt, you're just bitter because you never sprung for a front row seat, and that's when it's really cool. Actually, I do think it's like, is it a fun spot to see if you're not in the front row? Like, I'm sure if you're in the front row and someone right in front of you gets slammed into something, there's a novelty to it. But like, if you're even in the second row, are you like, okay, I'd rather you up in the ring where I can see you.
But I would argue that at least on these East Coast shows, the same people are in the front row most of the time every month. So I'm sure even to them it didn't mean as much. You know what I mean? Like they've seen it 1,000 times too. But yeah, it just hit me during this match, and then I saw it again in a few other matches. So it's not really specifically a critique of these wrestlers. But anyway. Yeah, I think the last match we saw with where Steen turned babyface against the Hangman 3, he wasn't getting the full babyface treatment the way they kind of expected. But I think in this match, he was. Obviously Generico played the face in peril, and Steen was definitely getting into being a babyface. He comes in, he immediately hits a flipping leg drop. He screams at the crowd to cheer for him, and then just basic tag match after that. Steen always has a good hot tag, and gets a bit chaotic at the end when Generico Haluva kicks Whitmer, and then immediately Fosbury flops onto Albright on the floor, and then Steen takes the opportunity to swanton Whitmer and get the clean win. Other than that, there wasn't too much to it. I think Whitmer does do a very nice German suplex with a bridge. I'll give him that. I think Albright's over the head belly to belly is pretty cool. But otherwise, just a pretty basic match. It was fine. It was enjoyable. They didn't try to make it anything more than just an opening match. So it wasn't. They didn't really have high ambitions. I certainly think it didn't light anyone's world on fire, but it also wasn't bad.
Albert, what did you think? And obviously there is going to be a bit of a curve you have to grade things by, because any show is a lot of fun when you're sitting next to Matt. So
that's exactly what I was thinking. I was looking at everything through that lens, and it was, and those memories are so crisp almost 19 years later. No, I thought this was, like a perfectly good opener. It wasn't anything crazy. I actually had kind of a opposite or sort of different thought than Matt. Like, I get why, having brawling on the outside in the first match can seem excessive, but what struck me from a contemporary wrestling perspective was, matches and shows in general are very long these days and tend to be, and an opening match that's, just under 9 minutes and feels right. And it feels like this didn't overstay its welcome. And honestly, it's just a treat to see this era of El Generico and Kevin Steen again. They were a couple of my favorites from this time, and I hadn't really watched them in a while. I noticed Kevin Steen wearing a singlet, which is something that I wouldn't have seen as especially significant, except for some recent talk about that era. Some of it detailed by Trevor on the
I don't know
internet.
what you're talking about.
So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, no, it was perfectly fine. Pretty fun opening match. Yeah, so no real complaints there. And just the general, I will also say when I hit play on the show and I saw it was under 3 hours, which I don't think was atypical or anything, but given the length of wrestling shows these days, it also felt nice that it was.
It is nice, isn't it?
Yeah, I was like, oh damn, I forgot wrestling shows could be this length.
Albert, do you remember I don't know if you remember back in the day, but back in the day there was the ROH. The common complaint would be like, this show went over 4 hours, or this went 4 hours. It was way too long. ROH puts on shows that are way too long. That's just what wrestling shows are scheduled for now.
Yeah.
Like, it is crazy how the age has changed. 45 used to be old in wrestling. It's not anymore. 4 hours used to be long. It's not anymore. So in terms of this match, I am not a fan of Steen and Generico's reward for the Great Briscoes feud being them stuck in a program with the Hangman 3. But on the other hand, I do think turning them face immediately after the Briscoes feud was the smart play, as they had gotten over it basically as soon as they wrestled the Briscoes for the first time in ROH. Generico, in his way, was always a face, but on this night, 2 of the times Steen tags in, I felt like got the biggest reactions of the entire match. People just were really into getting to have 100% complete permission to cheer for Steen now. This match wasn't that long. It was wrestled at a fairly brisk pace. It was like a slightly sped up version of the match you'd expect from them. Brawl outside to start. Generico takes a beating. Steen tags in and kicks some ass. Every section of the match is just a little quicker than you'd expect, but it's everything is where you'd expect it to be. It's pleasant viewing the whole way through. I continue to say that Whitmer and Albright just aren't being the tag team I want them to be. I want them to be the big jocks of ROH who are destroying people with their offense. I want them to be like the early 90s Steiners. And while I know that's an unrealistic expectation for them, I think they could have gotten closer to that ideal than they're showing at this time. Like in this match, they just throw some punches, then they trade off hitting their signature moves. I just want a little more meanness, a little more power offense, a little more brutality. And occasionally in some matches, they do show you just enough to let you know, oh yeah, they could do that. But Steen was the highlight of this match. When he hit that drop kick from the second turnbuckle, that was genuinely a nice drop kick. And he has sometimes you almost forget that Steen has some natural athleticism at this point, because you see him doing stuff like the senton, but his big athletic moves are usually like the same 3 or 4 moves. So when he does a different athletic move that you don't see as often, you're like, oh, you almost realize you've been taking the other stuff he does for granted. Overall, I thought this was above average. It's not what Steen and Generico could give you in another setting, so in that sense, it's a disappointment. But if you feel like openers should be quick and kind of breezy and just a kind of a, but doesn't, do every spawn under the sun, I felt like this filled that niche. So immediately after the match, Shane Hagedorn runs in and he blinds Steen and Generico with the messiest handful of powder ever. This poor guy, it was like he took too full of a handful or his hand was too loose because this was spilling everywhere. And I have to check that off my bucket list one day. Is I want to throw a big handful of powder at somebody one day. Seems like
I think of all the things involved in a wrestling match, that's one of the easiest things to replicate.
Well, Trevor, if you take me up on an offer that I made to you off the air, I would do everything possible to give you the opportunity.
Let it be known, Matt wants someone to throw a bunch of white powder.
Only Trevor. Anybody else who does it, no, it's unacceptable. That's how I feel.
Do you think if I ever had a child and I just threw a big handful of talc at my baby just one time as a joke, that I would get in trouble or not? I just said, look, it's a fun experience to have. The baby doesn't mind. Let's do it.
How do you know? How do you know the baby doesn't mind? That's a baby can't consent.
Look, if he goos and gaws when I ask him, I'm taking that as a yes. But
this is problematic. And no, I don't want anyone throwing white powder at me.
So Albright dumps Steen with a half Nelson suplex after he takes that delicious white powder. Whitmer lays out Generico with a brainbuster. The crowd chants, "Fuck the Hangmen," which is either showing their distaste for the stable or their distaste for old-style capital punishment. You don't know which one. But we then join Whitmer, Albright, and Hagedorn backstage. Hagedorn is on the phone with Adam Pearce, who isn't at the show on this night. He will be at the show the next night. Whitmer and Albright say that, well, Generico and Steen won the battle tonight. They, here at Hangman 3, they've won the war. They call Delirious a clown and say this was a message for him because they're taking him out next. Matt, ROH, we talked about how long are they going to stick with this. Gabe's been a little intermittent with it, but he is still sticking for a few shows now. Do post-match promos in some cases immediately after the match.
Yeah, he's definitely finally found something that he is willing to stick with, and it makes me so happy because, Albert, I don't know if you're aware of this, but throughout the first half of 2007, he was always trying like new weird gimmicks with the promo style, like wrestlers looking off to the side instead of looking at the camera, or like weird video effects. And now he's finally settled on this thing where they'll cut to a wrestler cutting a promo immediately after a match ends to talk about what happened in the match. And we weren't sure if it was going to last, but this one finally seems to have lasted. And I, for one, am extremely happy for Gabe that he found something that he was satisfied with.
This is the kind of thing you have to get excited about when you watch every ROH show.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say it's a good buffer between the matches. And also, before we move on, I do have a prepared statement I'd like to read about this opening, segments. All right, it begins. If I'm going to watch a man named BJ performing on a show taking place in the state of Pennsylvania in the fall of 2007, it's not going to be BJ Whitmer. It's going to be BJ Novak on season 4 of The Office. And that was a big season for him. It's where he became part of Dunder Mifflin Corporate.
Was that Prime BJ?
This is an on-brand comment from Albert Ching.
It's like being in an AOL Instant Messenger chat with him 19 years ago. Yes. And you know what? You guys are unlucky. You didn't get this experience constantly. But that brings us to Claudio Castagnoli defeating Hallowicked via pinfall in 5 minutes, 57 seconds after hitting a running European uppercut. Albert, was this prime Novak level wrestling?
Again, it's kind of nice just to have a quick, not squash match, but obviously pretty fairly one-sided match on a show like this. I think it got the job done of putting Claudio over before I think he wrestled Mirafucci the next night. Is that correct?
I think you might be right. See, I'm a horrible host.
Yeah. What I did notice was they were talking on commentary about how Hallowicked needed a win to stay on the roster. And I believe that was a shoot. I believe he doesn't really show up again in Ring of Honor after this. And I was like, dang, that's harsh. But I guess that's, wins and losses matter.
That is something they did multiple times in ROH, where they would say, this guy needs to start winning soon. They're not going to make. And I would say 8 times out of 10 when they said that, that person wasn't going to win soon and they were going to leave. So yeah, this happened. So this match, these two had a match earlier in the year in the first round, the Race to the Top tournament, and that match went 7 minutes. So this one only went 6. So we're actually going backwards. They're getting even less time. And I think I like this match a little less than the previous match. I said the opener was like a slightly sped up version of the match that those teams would have had if they had went, like, say, 12 to 14 minutes. This didn't feel like a sped up version of a longer match. This felt like the first 6 minutes of a longer match, which made it feel disappointing when it ended so soon. There's a little bit of slow work the way you'd have in the opening of a longer match. There's 1 minute of real excitement where Hallowicked and Claudio go full Chikara and trade some neat athletic offense, stuff like arm drag variations. And then the rest is more middle of the road, middle of a match stuff. And I did like Hallowicked's running up the corner, step up Enziguri. I think that's always a cool move when he does it. What was interesting for me was to watch this in the context of it being Philly, which was a major Chikara market, where you watch this match and Hallowicked gets a small chant early on, but when he gets control for a brief chunk of the match in the middle of it, the crowd goes pretty quiet, actually. overall, I thought this was average. There was, again, a fun minute or two of stuff within this, but feels like a waste because it's the first third or half of a match to me. This is like if you've ever, I don't know if you guys had parents like this where they would say, you'd get that meal with the main course and the vegetables and the french fries, and your parents would know you, the bratty kid, if you had your way, you'd eat the french fries first and then say you were full when she knows goddamn well you weren't full. So she would tell you, you eat all the vegetables first before you touch one french fry. I felt like this meal was like, we're going to make you eat all the vegetables first, and then when you're about to touch the french fries, go, nope, meal's over. Meal's over. There are no french fries. And so, I felt bad for Hallowicked in this match where this is one of those matches watching it where I was like, if I was Hallowicked or any guy in his position, I'd be begging Gabe. Like, I'd just be telling him, instead of booking me for these 5 different matches for ROH shows that are each like 6 minutes each where I have to hold back and they're early in the card. How about you book me for one show in one match with a good opponent for 13 minutes? Just tell me to go nuts, try and steal the show. And if I don't do good, just don't book me again. Like, I honestly think that I would, if I was a wrestler breaking in and I had faith in my own talent, which is a huge stretch for me, but that's what I would want. I would much rather want one 13-minute match than 5 6-minute matches. But Matt, what did you think about this?
I'm trying to think. 5 6-minute matches, but every match I do all different moves, and none of the same moves are repeated. And no one cares.
Are you trying to say that technically that would be a 30-minute match?
No, a lateral press.
Not even a lateral press. I would have to do all different pinning combinations. I mean, I'd probably lose all the matches and not get to even try to pin anybody. But if there's a wrestler out there that wants to try it, make sure that at the end of the series of matches, the 5 6-minute matches, you get on the mic and say, that was for Matt Feuerstein. And if you do that, I'll thank you on the podcast.
If anyone during a wrestling show ever says that was for Matt Feuerstein, I will send them an ROH DVD.
But it'll probably be something bad, though. And so I don't want to hear it. They'll probably be fuck you, I hate all the fans. That's for Matt Feuerstein specifically. It's the worst. If anyone does something nice and then says that was from Matt Feuerstein, Trevor's going to send you an ROH DVD, The Bitter End.
I think I still have a couple left.
Yeah. But yeah, I pretty much agree with you, Trevor. This is one of those matches also where Claudio really milks the hey stuff for like a long time. And my favorite part of the match was the early sequence where they clearly have worked together a lot because of the Chikara connection, and they're doing all the arm drags and the rolls and the reversals and the quick pins, and they get a nice applause after that. That's the most fun part of the match. I think after that, like you said, it settles into sort of a slow middle of the match type of deal. And yeah, it had some nice sequences, but it was short. It was lacking drama. And I do think it's disappointing because these two do have good chemistry. And I agree. I liked the match at the Race to the Top tournament a little more. This was, it certainly wasn't bad because they did everything well, but it's, it definitely could have been a lot better.
So immediately after this match, Larry Sweeney comes out with a mic in his hand, and the crowd is chanting sweet and sour as soon as he starts talking. They're big into Larry on this night, as they usually are these days in ROH. Sweeney says,
but before you get into what he says, I just have to mention this is where I noticed something that to me is one of the most noteworthy things on this whole show, which I don't know if you realize this, Trevor. I think this is the clearest the Ring of Honor house mic has ever sounded on DVD. Every piece of audio that was spoken in front of the fans was absolutely crystal clear. I've never seen that happen before. I wonder if that will be a trend from now on, but it was remarkable to me. Like, there was no echo or muffling or any sound of distance. It didn't sound weird. It just sounded like a normal house mic that you would hear on like a televised wrestling show. It was unbelievable because the audio is often worse than the video on ROH shows, and this was just perfect audio.
It's been 5.5 years to get to the point where, as praise, you can finally say, I understood every word someone said on the microphone.
Seriously,
it took them 5.5 years to get to that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, the crowd's chanting sweet and sour. That is amazing. I didn't notice that. I you know what? Sometimes I forget where we've come from, Matt. But Sweeney says everyone knows the history between him and Claudio. They don't like each other. Sweeney offers to buy Claudio out of his ROH deal. He says he sold Matt Seidel to Vince recently, and he can do the same for Claudio. That actually gets some boos. Fans back then did not like the idea of you selling out to the WWE. That's changed, but back then that was still could get you some heel heat, even if you were beloved like Sweeney was at this time. Larry says Everyone knows Claudio was about to leave ROH once before, and then Sweeney pulls out some kind of contract. Claudio grabs a mic and says, Sweeney's contract will come in very handy the next time I run out of toilet paper. I love
it was very Triumph the Insult Comic Dog coded. It was very, that's a good contract for me to poop on. That's basically what he said.
You could tell that Claudio had like that line in his pocket. He'd probably like said it to himself pacing the halls like 5 or 6 times before the promo. Claudio promises that one day he'll get his hands on Larry and give him the beating he deserves. And angry Sweeney says Claudio's going to pay for that. So we'll get to that later. So it is interesting that they actually Gabe, I guess, Claudio, the fans accepted Claudio right when he came back through the whole thingamadoo where, Claudio was going to go to WWE and for whatever reason they backed out. But it's interesting that they're almost trying to really cement that like, oh, he's ROH. He's turning down the chance to go back to WWE now. And that brings us to the third match on the show. Davey Richards defeated Delirious via submission in 13 minutes, 33 seconds when he made him tap out to the Kimura. This match up at first seemed a little weird to me since Delirious was currently feuding with the Hangman 3. But Lenny Leonard explains that this is Delirious actually tying up a loose end because he says, Delirious never got a chance to get direct revenge on Davey Richards with another singles match during his feud with the No Remorse Corps. And so, Delirious asked for this. And all of that actually made the result more interesting to me because the result here is Delirious losing completely clean by tap out to a heel he wanted to get, tie that loose end up. There's no interference. There's no cheating. There's nothing. So the story of this match is Delirious, a babyface, specifically asked for this match because he had unfinished. I have to reiterate this because it blew my mind because he had unfinished business in a feud. He loses it clean, and then that's it. Because for the rest of the year and into 2008, Delirious goes right back to his feud with the Hangman 3. So this is the end of his feud with them. And in a way, I felt like this was actually very relatable to me in that it's a feud where someone says he wants to do something, he fails at it, and then he immediately decides he never wants to try again. He just gives up on it. To me, it's the most relatable feud I've ever seen in wrestling. Delirious at this point, he might be ROH's new BJ Whitmer for me in that he's very consistent, but he's rarely thrilling. I think Whitmer had the occasional high-end, surprisingly awesome match more often than Delirious, especially with like the hardcore stuff he did, stuff with Jimmy Jacobs and stuff like that, and Necro Butcher. But Delirious is probably a little more consistent than Whitmer. But like the way I would describe Delirious is if you grab 10 other mid-card Delirious matches from around this era of ROH, I would say at least 7 of them would not just be the same quality of this match, they'd have a lot of the same moves and structure. Because Delirious matches, they don't seem to vary much in this era. He has a grasp of his offense. He spaces it out well. He knows what works for him. He knows what doesn't work for him. And he just does it over and over again. For me, that puts this match in the realm of above average, but kind of dull. For the idea that Delirious requested this match to settle like a feud, it doesn't have much hate in it. That's why the finish was notable to me, like that win for Davey. It was the one slight surprise of the match I would otherwise say had zero surprise. It is a little disappointing that this match got almost as much time as the first 2 matches combined. I feel like both of them probably could have each made do with at least some of the minutes these 2 guys had, and these two wouldn't have been hurt by losing a little time. But as always, this is the kind of match where if the rest of the card is good, I'm fine with it. If the rest of the card is fairly flawed, gets a little more annoying, but it's fine with that. Matt, what'd you think?
I liked it a little bit more than you. I think what you say about Delirious is definitely true, and it is funny how they frame the match. Although, I feel like they wanted to book these 2 guys against each other, and they tacked on a reason for it. I don't think they gave it as much thought as you did even, but what I liked about the match was just that, and yes, it was a little too long and there were some slow spots, but I liked that Richards was more serious here than he has been recently. I was getting, because I think Richards was good in this era, and I think that he played the fool character a little bit too often in the No Remorse Corps unit, and in this match he was just wrestling seriously, and I think that's where he does best personally. And I like that all the arm work that he did was actually something that played into the finish. I think that made it more interesting, and it made the surprising finish a little bit, make more sense, I guess. Also notable, Delirious, it seems like he's now working in the Here It Is driver as part of his regular repertoire now, that as a tribute to Seidel, which is which is nice, I guess. But yeah, I think that the match was nothing special or anything, but I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it more than you did, and I enjoyed it more than the crowd did. They certainly weren't red hot for it either, but so I think your reaction is probably closer to what most people felt. But I thought that this was a pretty well worked match.
Dave wrote in the Observer that based on live reports, Richards beat Delirious. A lot of the crowd isn't into Richards. I didn't get that impression that like, oh, the crowd's turning on Davey Richards. I just felt like, oh, they weren't a particularly lively crowd and they didn't react hugely to kind of a mid match. But Albert, 2 questions. I want to know what you thought about this match, but also during this match, Davey calls one fan that's heckling him, "Oh, what?" He says something like, "What's it to you, skinny guy?" Of all the names a heel could call you, is that one of the best ones? Like, I'd be like, "Hey, you've been noticing I've been going on a diet. Thank you, man."
I mean, I guess it depends, right? You could be like, unhealthily skinny.
Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe that's what he meant. But yeah, it is a weird inversion of like calling fans fat boy or something like that. Like it's like, oh, all right.
Also, for like big muscular jock types, calling someone skinny is a pretty big insult.
Yeah, that's also a good point. Yeah, like he would only want people, I guess, that looked exactly like him.
That's right.
I think I'm somewhere right in line with both of you for this match. It was fine. It did feel a little too long, especially, honestly, given the comparative match lengths of the first 2 matches. The story that's told, which was kind of not that much of a story, just that a guy tried to do something and couldn't do it. But I liked watching Davey wrestle at this time, and also for many years after that. He's someone who I saw countless times in my PWG days. And it's fun to see him in this phase of his career. But yeah, wasn't too much to it, but it certainly wasn't anything objectionable. But it didn't move me that much, and didn't move the crowd, of which I was a part of either.
So after the match, Davey offers a handshake. Delirious actually accepts it, and then Davey immediately slaps Delirious on the back of the head and runs away, which turns out to be the thrilling conclusion of the Delirious No Remorse core feud. Or is it? We will see later. It kind of is. Next, we have another clip that the on-screen graphic says, once again, is provided by the Age of the Fall, and it sees them in a rundown neighborhood in Philly. Jimmy Jacobs says, Walmarts are packed while this neighborhood with mom and pop stores is falling apart. Tyler Black talks about how the mega stores like Walmart and IKEA are replacing those mom and pop shops, but in 5 or 10 years, it's all going to crumble, which has not been borne out. Well, in some ways.
I think it sort of has. I don't know.
Jacob says the Age of the Fall is actually going to do something about it, but will we wage a war of action with them, or will we wage a war of apathy and do nothing about it? I just wrote my notes in all caps. What is the stable about? What?
And also, how can they accomplish this goal through having professional wrestling matches? Although, to be fair, Lenny Leonard does kind of try on commentary to explain it, where he says that like wrestling gives them a platform to spread this message. But it is funny to try and reconcile their stated goals with pinfall attempts. And
I'm more impressed, Albert, that you have any ability to discern their stated goals, because I sure can't. I think it's very fun. They wage a war of action or a war of apathy to do what exactly? Is it to save Walmart, or is it to save mom and pop stores, or what are they talking about? And I strongly feel like they don't really totally know either.
Yeah, I just. They never say what they're going to do. They want to win the tag titles because that gives them power. They don't tell you what they will use that power for. It is just nothing. But,
to be fair, in 2007, there was no more powerful position than Ring of Honor Tag Team Champion.
So we're going, what should be the main event then, it's in the middle of the card, the most powerful belts in the land. The ROH World Tag Team titles were defended when the Briscoes of Jay and Mark successfully defended those belts by defeating the No Remorse core of Rocky Romero and Roderick Strong in 17 minutes, 59 seconds when Mark pinned Roddy after a springboard doomsday device. Matt, this is the first Briscoes tag, at least in ROH, since Mark suffered the dislocated foot that wasn't the match in Vegas where he hobbled around and was clearly not doing good. What'd you think about this one?
So I think that this match could have been better with more heat. I think that a lot of this match got a pretty tepid reaction, and I think more story. This definitely had the Briscoes match from this era problem of too many tags in and out, too many shifts of momentum, and not enough of a building up to something specific. It's actually the rare Briscoes match where the Briscoes were not the ones that stood out to me as like the hardest working, most impressive people in the match. I really thought that Rocky Romero was working really hard here and was impressive comparison, even in comparison to the other guys in the match. I think he stood out to me the most. But I think it didn't reach a level that it could have reached, and they definitely got the time to do it. They just didn't really build anything. They started slow. They exchanged Mark and Romero exchanged holds. They did a pretty good job. Strong took a lot of time milking the heckles that was done. There were some good spots, actually a few times where Jay and Romero exchanged strikes in the middle of the ring, and the crowd usually got into that pretty good. But there was a spot in the middle where Prazak mentions that no team has gotten much momentum after 10 minutes, and it's been lots of back and forth. And my reaction was, hey, he finally noticed what the Briscoes matches are like, because we've talked about that so many times in the times we reviewed them. But yeah, I think this is a lesser match between the Briscoes. Between the Briscoes and the No Remorse Corps, especially compared to the one that we reviewed at what was it? Undeniable? Was that the show where they had the tag team title match?
God, Matt, I'm
gonna say it was Undeniable. But it was something like that. But yeah, I was surprised that Strong took the fall, but I guess it's because Romero and Richards were still gonna have some more matches against the Briscoes. But yeah, anyway, it wasn't bad. It was, if anything, probably a little bit good, but just pretty slow and disappointing. That's how I felt about it, and I thought that Romero stood out.
Albert, what do you think about this? I'm always interested in hearing what people who haven't been rewatching every single Briscoes match of this era think of, just popping in for a Briscoes match here in this era, because they definitely did work a certain way. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, that's certainly what I was doing, popping in, and I'll tell you, having not the sharpest memory of this match 19 years later, and hit and play and seeing that Briscoes and No Remorse Corps was on this show, I was excited. I was licking my lips for some hot tag team wrestling.
I'm picturing you doing it right now.
Yeah, I was rubbing the hands together. It was I was excited to feast. And it was fine. It was it didn't move me very much. I would say this is the second or maybe third match in a row that it's just I think it got the job done. I wouldn't say there was anything that I could specifically say was bad, but it just I never really felt like it got to a super hot level that I was expecting to with this group of participants. And it was noticeable that the crowd did seem quiet. It made me wonder if the crowd was just mic'd poorly, because I, again, don't have great memories on how the crowd was 19 years ago. Matt, do you remember?
No, I don't, but I feel like ROH, the crowd reactions that appear on the video,
pretty apparent. Yeah.
Yeah, the way they appear on the video is pretty much how they usually are in the building. Philly crowds can be kind of hit and miss. I thought they were, good for some of the matches and not so good for others. But yeah, I think if anything, I don't know if they mic'd the crowd at all, but I could be wrong about that.
Right.
I think I asked
small
Keith.
Enough of a place.
Yeah, I think I asked Keith Lipinski that once when he was on the show, and he seemed to indicate that a lot of times on indie shows they don't actually mic the crowd. It's just whatever they pick up through the cameras or whatever. But I don't know either. I don't remember seeing mics at any point. But yeah, anyway, yes, I don't think the crowd was that into this match.
So I actually like this match a little bit more than both of you guys. This was an intriguing match to me. Cage match is generally very kind to ROH of this era, and this match, when I was just looking up stuff, it had 12 user votes and it got an average rating of 5.62 out of 10, which works out to barely over 2 3/4 stars. Now, I'm not that far off that. I would probably, if we were using star ratings, go to like 3 1/4, maybe barely into 3.5. But so my opinion's not that much different. But I was more shocked that 12 people actually reviewed this match. That was like, this match needs to be, because there are a lot of matches that don't get ratings on Cage Match.
Only 2 matches on the show have a rating. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is one of them, which is interesting. So yeah, this is, like I said before, this is Mark's first ROH match, not counting the California match where he was hobbling around since he dislocated his foot. And on commentary, Lenny says Mark told him he's 90%, and it looks that way. But later on, Mark totally makes Lenny look stupid. We'll get to it later. But maybe you see a little hesitancy in Mark occasionally if you really look for it, but he's really running around doing moonsaults just fine. He's back at this point. And what makes this match, what really stood out in this match to me is the differences from the other Briscoe tags of this era, which are often, as Matt was saying, like they're pretty similar to each other. And the differences aren't all good. The beginning is a little slower than most Briscoe tags, and where most Briscoe tags stay at one pretty high tempo the whole match and then maybe explode even more in the final 5 minutes. This match had at least 2 or 3 moments where I thought, okay, it's going to kick into high gear right about now. It seems like they're ramping up, only for it to kind of stall back down a little. And all of that's exacerbated by the fact that you guys talked about this crowd. To me, I thought this crowd, which I gave it when I was watching it at the show, I gave them a free pass for the first 3 matches. So I thought, well, none of those matches were anything to crow about. I felt like at this point watching this match, okay, this crowd kind of sucks. Like they pop. No offense to the 2 of you.
Yeah, I was going to say that's harsh.
With 2 exceptions.
Okay, thank you.
They were popping for all the key spots, I would say, on this night, but the pops were very short-lived, and they were often quiet otherwise. Like, I would describe them as a stingy crowd, where it's not that they weren't giving any reactions, but they were giving you the minimum reaction that they could to be good-mannered fans. But
honestly, I wish I was stingier. I'd have more money saved up right now.
What would you do with all that money, Matt? You look at all the memories you've got. What would you do? Leave the memories alone. Don't change them. So, the final minutes, while they were good, I felt like they didn't reach the high bar that Briscoe's stretch runs have set for themselves with, in terms of like pace, flow, sheer amount of moves and near falls. None of it's bad. It's not quite what we usually see from them. So if I'm saying all this criticism, why do I say that I also like this match a bit more than you guys? And I would guess that's because Matt, I completely agree. I thought Rocky and Roddy were both really on their game tonight, added a really fun dynamic, and I agree that they actually outworked the Briscoes on this night. They are both great about throwing big strikes here, and there's a couple sequences where Rocky and Jay just wail on each other for a while, and I would like more Briscoes matches like that, where they face people that take them out of their indie work rate realm, and they force them into this world of not like even garbage brawls like with the Age of the Fall, but just hard hitting slugfest, because I think they are really good in those too, and it's a fun switch up. So it's a weird match because I feel like it slightly deviates from the 06-07 Briscoe formula while still having many of the positives and negatives of that formula. And even though some of those deviations didn't work for me, I just liked that this match felt moderately different in terms of pace and tone. So I would call this a good match. And in a way, at this stage of my viewing, having rewatched every ROH DVD up to this with you, Matt, I'd rather see a 3 1/4 star Briscoes match that is a little different, even in maybe not an entirely positive way, than another 3 3/4 star Briscoes match that I've seen a dozen times before. I'd probably rather see a 4 1/4 star Briscoes match that feels like ones I've seen before over all of this. But to me, my hierarchy is I'll take good and different over very good and the same, but not over great and the same. So to me, this was good and slightly different, so I'll take it. But Gabe is really big on post-match angles tonight, because as soon as this match ends, the Age of the Fall Screaming Girl theme plays, and they run in through the crowd to brawl in the ring with the Briscoes. Lacey sneaks in the ring and low blows both Briscoes. The No Remorse Corps then gets in a standoff and shoving match with the Age of the Fall before the Vulture Squad of Jack Evans, Ruckus, Jigsaw, and Julius Smokes comes out. And so we now have a match between the Age of the Fall of Jimmy Jacobs, Necro Butcher, and Tyler Black, scored to the ring by Lacey, defeated the Vulture Squad of Jack Evans, Jigsaw, and Ruckus, scored to the ring by Julius Smokes in 6 minutes, 28 seconds, when Jacobs made Jigsaw tap out to the end time. Albert, what was it like getting the live Vulture Squad Julius Smokes experience?
I was very excited. This is one of the things I remember most about this show is being excited about the Vulture Squad. Matt knows that I love moves and I love dives, and there was a lot to come in this overall segment. And it was fun. Uh, do you either of you know if this was a match that was advertised in advance, or was it meant to be like an impromptu match that happened with all the run-ins? It's kind of was hard to tell on the broadcast.
I do not remember.
I think it was advertised, but I don't remember
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah, but this was a lot of fun, and it was a hoot to watch live in 2007, and I enjoyed watching it back earlier today in the year 2026.
This was wrestled under scramble rules. It was 6 minutes of spots and nothing else. On many wrestling show, I would say there are too many matches like this, but this is a card where I think at this point in the night, it desperately actually needed a match like this, something that was just fast, big, dumb, and exciting. I felt like the crowd, the opening minutes of this, whereas the host they had been the whole show so far, although by the last half, they started to get back to more of their stingy baseline, I'll say. But there are just a ton of spots packed into this. The most notable to me was how they built to a Necro Butcher Jack Evans standoff and how the crowd seemed to treat it as something of a big deal. And it just reminded me of it is such a crazy clash of styles that it was exciting to see, these people are from two different worlds. And I feel like in modern wrestling, those kinds of matchups are so much rarer because so many wrestlers now are more well-rounded and so many wrestlers now just work a similar style where, I was thinking, I don't know if either guys have the answer to this. Is there any match you could think of today that you could put on that would be as big a styles clash as Necro Butcher versus Jack Evans? It doesn't even seem possible now. It just seems crazy to me. But
I'm now in my head trying to think about this.
Yeah, well, I'll give you some time.
I think you could do that match now. I think they both are still.
Yeah, there you
go.
go.
Yeah, you could actually.
Yeah, so that match, that one specifically.
It's possible that over the years it's not as crazy anymore as it would have been. Back then.
I mean, it wasn't on the level of Jack Evans against Necro Butcher, but 5 years ago when AEW put on Nick Gage against Chris Jericho, there was it wasn't that degree, but there was a little bit of that in there. You know what I mean? But even that 5 years ago, that's a long time. So.
Yeah, that's a great poll. That's probably is the closest we have to a modern equivalent, I bet. But like you just said, I don't even think that's quite on the same level. But you're right, that is probably the best thing to pull out. The short time the two Jack and Necro spent together, I enjoyed it. But you did also see that style clash negative in one spot. You saw the fun of it, which was there's a spot where Jack slams Necro off the apron to the floor, and it's a bump Necro takes all the time, getting slammed off the ring apron to the floor, and he must have called for it. And if you watch Jack, it is clear he has never done this before in his life, and he's pretty uncomfortable, getting the grip and the throw. He's pretty apprehensive, okay, I got to get my hand up here, I got to get my other hand down here. Okay, let's do it. It was kind of adorable. I always think that's fun when a wrestler calls for a move that another wrestler has clearly never done and didn't really prepare for, and they're like, shit, do I even know how to do this? I'll just fake it. I always like that. Vulture Squad picks up another loss here early in their run. And I'll go back to what we said on another episode, which is that Gabe started too many stables at the same time. And so rather than each stable getting this strong, dominant start to launch them, there weren't enough wins to go around. And so, I would say Age of the Fall at this point was getting well fed and Vulture Squad was scrounging for crumbs. And you see that here. They get minorly protected in this match because Ruckus does get hit with the chair during it, but he's not involved in the finish, which was just a clean, direct loss for Jigsaw. Overall, I thought this was a super high, above average, cresting almost into good. It's hard for me to rate because it was fun and what this show needed, but it was short, so I can't rate it too high and act like it's something really notable that you need to go out of your way to see it because it wasn't. But finally, I'll just end before I pass it to you, Matt. I will say the finish got a laugh out of me because Jigsaw taps out and the bell doesn't ring. For a second, I was thinking, why isn't anyone ringing the bell? And then Necro Butcher walks in the ring, and you can see he's stolen the ring bell and the hammer, and he's walking in the ring, walking around, hitting them like a small child who grabbed a pot and a wooden spoon, like the old Bart Simpson thing. And I thought that was, in a way, it was strangely adorable. I know he's done that before. And it got me thinking, do kids still just bang pots with wooden spoons? Because I know I did when I was a kid, but I feel like nowadays when you just have an iPad from the age of 3, like, is there a novelty in the big cardboard box? Is there a novelty in the metal pot and the wooden spoon and wearing a colander on your head? Because Matt, I might join the Age of the Fall if there isn't room for those things anymore, because maybe society really has crumbled if we don't have those things in the children of today.
I think kids still play with things besides screens. I think not all parents give a kid an iPad like the minute that they're born. But,
if you're a kid and you bang on pots and pans, email ThROH@gmail.com.
Hey, Trevor, maybe I'll try to let you know in a few years. But anyway, I agree with you. This is what the show needed at this point, and this is the hottest that the crowd had been, and one of the hottest that the crowd would get all night. This and the segment after. I did think it was, they did a lot of stuff that was almost to the point where it was hard to keep track of all like the fun stuff they were doing. I did think it was funny when Necro knocked Ruckus off the top rope with a chair, and the announcers are like, "The referee didn't see it," and I'm like, "Yeah, okay, like this happens all the time in ROH. It doesn't matter if the referee saw it at all." Like, I think it's funny that they acted like he would have been disqualified or something. The one thing I'll say is that these teams had a match at Honor Nation, and actually, no, I'm wrong. They did not. I was confusing two different matches. That was when the Vulture Squad wrestled the NRC. And that match, I think, was a little better than this one because it was longer and more, they got more time to do stuff. But I thought that this was really fun for what it was. And I would have liked to see a longer scramble between these two teams because I think they could have really had a good, 10-plus minute example of this. I think the chemistry is really good, so I would like to see more of it. Yeah, it was too short to be too much, but it was very entertaining while it lasted.
So after the match, here we go with this. After the match, the Briscoes, who had brawled to the back before the start of the previous match with the No Remorse Corps, come back out. They attack the Age of the Fall. Then the No Remorse Corps runs in. They join the fight, and we have a 3-way feud, faction warfare. As everyone brawls on the floor, Lacey gets in the ring, and she grabs the mic, and she screams on the mic that for everyone that is part of the Age of the Fall, the movement, the fans that are part of the movement, to make their way to the front of the ringside area right now and stand up. She says every single woman in the building should be on their feet, so like all 7 of them. She says if we don't support the Age of the Fall, we don't support freedom. We support oppression of women. The crowd at this point chants, "Shut the fuck up" at this. And again, I ask, what the fuck is the stable all about? We've moved on now from gentrification to women's oppression. And then Lacey screams, saying that the crowd is calling her a whore. But all of us have very intimate knowledge of whores because we all came from the womb of a whore. All of our mothers are whores. And I would just want to point out that in the span of 20 seconds, Lacey went from saying that if we don't support the Age of the Fall, we support the oppression of women, to calling hundreds of women whores.
Did the crowd actually chant whore at her? Or did she just have,
or did she, it wasn't audible.
She had that, or I think she might have had that line in her back pocket.
Yeah, they have called her whore on other shows, but this show, yes. The only chant I could hear was "shut the fuck up." So yeah, I think you're right that she had that line preloaded, that banger of a line. So at this point, Daisy Hayes runs in and tries to attack Lacey, but Lacey hits her with the microphone. Daisy makes a comeback and hits Lacey with her mind trip finishing move and brawls with her to the floor. Davey Richards is doing a shooting star press to the floor, but then tells fans he's not going to do it before Delirious runs in and attacks him, tossing Davey to the floor. The ultimate Delirious revenge of tossing a man to the floor. Delirious
that was the blow-off of the feud.
Exactly. That is honestly the blow-off. Delirious tries to dive onto Davey when Brett Albright and BJ Whitmer and Shane Hagedorn run in and attack him. Steed and Generico then run in and attack the Hangman 3. We now have I would argue, 1 billion bodies on the floor is the exact number. And this is as many people as I can remember seeing in ROH in one of these segments. It's the same number of people. Delirious dives from the top turnbuckle onto all of them. Tyler Black then does a Fosbury flop onto everybody. Daisy Hayes does a dive to the floor on everybody. Necro then does a forward flip dive off the top turnbuckle into the crowd of wrestlers, which the fans go nuts for. Jay Briscoe does a dive into the wrestlers. Roddy throws Rocky Romero over the top rope into the wrestlers. Davey and Roddy do dives. Then all 3 members of the Vulture Squad get in the ring and do dives to 3 different sides of the floor. Dave Prazak at this point commentary screams, "Faction warfare is red hot here in Ring of Honor," as the brawl continues. Some of it spills into the crowd even. Back in the ring, Jack Evans and Ruckus take out Jimmy Jacobs and Roddy with top rope moves. And the Vulture Squad end this long post-match segment, standing tall in the middle of the ring, getting lots of cheers. Julius Smokes then gets on the mic. He introduces us to the Chocolate Vulture, which is Ruckus, and the Vanilla Vulture, which is Jack Evans. And then in a funny moment that I don't think was planned, he turns to Jigsaw and he pauses for half a second where it's like he's thinking, what the fuck am I going to call this guy? And he goes, and the Jigsaw Vulture. He says, the Chocolate Vulture, the Vanilla Vulture, and just your name, Vulture. And
Jigsaw is my favorite ice cream flavor.
I always love that flavor. We've seen Gabe do this kind of segment many times before, where a bunch of feuds collide in a post-match brawl, and then there's this dive train full of guys jumping into a crowd of wrestlers on the floor. But Matt, I don't know if you can think of another example. I don't think Gabe has ever done one this big and this stupid, and it worked for me. Like, there were so many run-ins and so many dives, and it went on for so long that at one point I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. And then they just kept coming to the point where it won me back over. It was like a joke you repeat so often, it becomes unfunny, and then you keep repeating it and it becomes funny again, where I almost turned on it and then was like, okay, this is good again. This is good now. And I did like the way Gabe structured the show so that every feud referenced in this segment had already been from the fans before this segment. So, you saw every faction in a match before they all collided in this segment. And it even ended with the Vulture Squad getting some much needed shine. Like, it wasn't an official win, but after 8,000 people were in the ring, they were the guys standing tall. So overall, I actually like this segment, even though it's just kind of what Gabe has done often before, but over the top with it.
That's a good point, that he had gotten everybody involved in it out before the crowd, before he showed this. Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you didn't like this segment, even after it was like the hottest the crowd had been the whole night, and I feel like the hottest that the faction warfare stuff would ever seem, right? It was during this segment. Then I feel like you're kind of out to lunch. Like, this clearly worked extremely well. It was fun and entertaining. I mean, I guess the only way I could see somebody not liking this is if they're just pretty adamant about wrestling's realism and not liking these very clearly choreographed segments where everybody just waits around for someone to dive on them. But ROH has done that a bajillion times, so that's just something you have to accept about Ring of Honor. Like, that's part of the style that they do. So yeah, I thought it was a hoot. I thought it was really fun. I do think it's funny, though, that after all this, we eventually have to go back to the streets of Philadelphia to hear more from the Vultures. I mean, more from the Age of the Fall. I feel like this should be like the last we see of Age of the Fall on this night, and we should have gotten all the other pre-tapes out of the way before we had this segment. I don't know.
You don't want to see them in front of the Liberty Bell.
I mean, I do, but I just wish I'd seen him sooner in front of the Liberty Bell. You know what I mean?
So, next, it's intermittent. I don't, unless you had something to say about that all rigmarole, Albert.
No, just it was super fun to watch, and yeah, that once it happened, I was satisfied enough that I turned to Matt and I said, I finally forgive you for taking me to the bitter end a year ago, and then we'll see what happens after intermission.
It's funny where when you said I was finally satisfied, I was thinking that you were about to say, I turned to Matt and said, let's go home. I don't need to see anything.
Yeah, I was like,
I'm good.
Yeah, I got to see a Necro Butcher top rope flip dive.
Yeah, it was a longish drive home, so I mean, it's not like
it certainly was. Yeah. Do you remember anything from intermission, Matt?
Do you?
No, but I do remember that they sold pizza at that venue.
I've been there enough times that I don't remember if I had pizza on this particular night, or I've definitely had the pizza at that venue, and while it wasn't particularly hot when I had it, I felt like it was perfectly tasty.
Do you remember another wrestling related non-Ring of Honor thing that I did during that weekend?
Was it Borat again?
Well, I remember we did not see Borat again, no, unfortunately. But
this is a good trivia question for Matt.
Okay, I mean, I remember a funny thing that you said the next night that I'll save, but I don't. I don't necessarily remember something else that you mentioned.
Something that I did, and you must have been there too.
I probably was. I remember some. I remember going out after the Manhattan Center show the next
That was
night.
no, this was before either of these shows.
No.
We went to a book signing at Borders for
Oh,
the release of A Lion's Tale Around the World in Spandex by
oh,
Chris
right.
Jericho.
Did you get a signed book?
I sure did, in a
Yeah.
picture with Y2J himself.
And okay,
Wow.
yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, in Manhattan, right?
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
Yeah.
So there, just another fun wrestling memory. Anyway,
Should have
intermission.
talked to him. I'm sure he would have loved to talk all about ROH. But
This was probably when he was like right about to come back to WWE, I would think.
Yes, I think so.
When they did the whole like breaking the code,
yeah,
little
the code breaker
viral
stuff.
clips. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So next is intermission. We join Rebecca Bayless backstage. Like an AEW segment, she is almost immediately interrupted, in this case by the Briscoes, who are super pumped that they just won their match. Jay asks Mark how his foot is, and Mark says 100%, 110%, contradicting Lenny's 90% quote from Mark earlier. So either it's improved that quickly, or Lenny's a dirty liar. But Jay calls Jacobs and Necros win over them in Las Vegas a fluke and says they'll put the titles on the line against them tomorrow night. Man up. Daisy Hayes then walks in and says she'll take care of Lacey tomorrow for them. The Briscoes are adorably excited by that. And they're like, hey, Daisy, you want to go get some beers with us? And she's down. So they end this segment going out to get some drinks. So camaraderie. I'm all for that. And that brings us to our first match back from intermission. The ROH Top of the Class trophy was defended. Ernie Osiris wins the trophy from champion Mitch Franklin via pinfall in 2 minutes 58 seconds after he hit a standing shooting star press. The poor students didn't even get ring introductions for this, as we start this match with both guys already in the ring. Don't get to see their entrances. This was as you'd expect with an ROH student match. It is short. There are moments of sloppiness. There's a mostly silent crowd. Osiris actually had good fire and energy, and he seemed to have more exciting and advanced offense than we usually see from ROH students in this era. In just 3 minutes, he did the run up his opponent in the corner tiger mask little flip. He did a suplex brainbuster combination. He did a nice wheelbarrow suplex, and he hit the standing shooting star press for the win. So I was like, wow, you actually have a bit of kind of, more flashier offense compared to a lot of his students. And Franklin kept things more basic. He hit a botched run off the second turnbuckle, and I always feel awful when you're barely given any time. I always say this, when you're given barely any time, and then you botch, I always feel like, man, that sucks. I feel bad for you because you don't get a chance to wipe that memory. Franklin won the Top of the Class trophy in late August because they had to get off of Pele Primo when he got hurt away from the ring. And Mitch didn't get to hold it long because he drops it here a little over 2 months later after having only, I think, one successful defense of the trophy. And watch the finish of this match, and you see a rare instance of both wrestlers simultaneously acting surprised that was the finish of the match. Like, Mitch acts shocked that it was a 3 count, but then you look at Ernie, and he is almost as surprised. Like, it is a weird match where both guys are like, wait, he won? And the other guy's like, wait, I won? So the one amusing thing to me about this match was, in these student matches, the commentary uses them as commercials to put over the ROH wrestling school. And during this match, they keep talking about how if you go to the Ring of Honor wrestling school, hey, maybe you'll get an opportunity like this one day. Like, you'll get to wrestle a match on the same show as Mitsuharu Misawa. That's these kind of things happen when you're a student in the Ring of Honor wrestling school. And I thought, well, that's cool, but it is telling that years on now, the school has been running for years at this point. Look at the great matches the students are having, or look how successful these wrestlers that have been in our school are becoming in our company. It is not the talking points, because they can't use those as talking points. The talking points, the selling points for these are always, hey, you might get to learn from a famous guest trainer, or you might get to brush elbows with a famous star who works the show. And I always go back to, when I was young and ROH Wrestling School first opened, that was maybe the only time I ever thought in my life for like half a second, maybe it would be cool for me to try and become a wrestler. But years later, like by this point, ROH, even though ROH was my favorite promotion of this era, and even though I did enjoy Pele Primo and Shane Hagedorn and Bobby Dempsey, if you had asked me at this time, Trevor, I want to be a wrestler, what U.S. wrestling school should I go to? I would have never suggested by this point the ROH Wrestling School. And not because I think you wouldn't have gotten taught the fundamentals, but because their system for developing guys after you got through the school was just not good. Like, for all the drama that surrounded Jakara in some ways, so many of their students got worlds more in-ring opportunities than the ROH students did. So Yeah, it was another one of those matches where I just got tickled by the way they sold the students. But Matt, what'd you think about, big title change on this show?
I think that the most notable thing to me was what you were just talking about. I think they were promoting the school a lot harder in this match than you usually see during these student matches. Yes, they even mentioned the great fundamentals that they learn. And yeah, you could be on the same show with someone like Misawa. It's like almost like, oh yeah, you get a backstage pass or something, as opposed to any sort of promotion of your own career. And yeah, like you mentioned, I think they did do more advanced stuff than usual. But because of that, it was also more sloppy than usual. They, like you said, the Rana off the middle rope, and also the the standing shooting star press that finished the match was kind of ugly too. So it was both better and worse than usual, but it was also very short, so not much of a match either way.
Albert, you got to see history. What'd you think about seeing a big title, a big trophy change here?
Trevor, you said you wouldn't recommend the ROH Wrestling Academy. The wrestling school that you would have recommended is Warrior University, right?
You learn about destructivity or whatever it was.
Destrucity is the word.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was struck by the same thing. It sounded like commentary. It sounded like the infomercial for the wrestling school. And yeah, the match was what it was. Ernie Osiris did look impressive. I guess neither of these guys really had long careers in wrestling, although I do know that they both stuck around ROH for a while and got more fleshed out gimmicks, right? Like Grizzly Redwood and Ernesto Osiris. Is that what he was known as?
I believe so, yes. Yeah, I mean, Mitch got, a little bit of fame for the Grizzly Redwood gimmick, and Ernie Osiris, sadly, at this point, is probably best remembered for having an erection during a match, so...
Oh, I didn't know that.
we talked about it on a past episode, but yeah. So,
I'll have to go back into the archives.
But yeah, so not much there, but still, congratulations to Ernie Osiris. So let me just go back. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes. Matt, we got a big match here, though. Best of 3 series, the third and final in the best of 3 series, the deciding match. Austin Aries defeats Bryan Danielson via pinfall in 17 minutes, 20 seconds after he hit a brainbuster. He wins the best of 3, 2 matches to 1. Matt, we've been on a bit of a ride with these guys. We've watched all 3 in recent time. Sometimes because we take 3 weeks between episodes, we'll have a match that was a year earlier, and I have to go back to my notes and go, what did I even think about that match? I think this is one of the only times where we can confidently talk about a series of matches and it's not going to be sucked from our memories because they did happen even recently by our standards. So what'd you think about this and how it stacks up with the other 2?
Yeah, so I know you really liked the first match, as did I. You liked the second match a little bit less than I did. And so I'm curious to hear what you think about this one. I think all 3 matches were great to different degrees. I do think it peaked with the first match. I'm not sure which I like better, the second or the third. I think the second match had a better crowd but I think this one did some more dynamic stuff and was pretty different. They did work the mat early, but it wasn't quite as much of the early mat work than the other matches. They go into strikes earlier, the chopping and the uppercutting, and I think there's a spot where Danielson, or the section where Danielson targets Aries' back. Danielson adds some viciousness here. There's a spot where he goes for the surfboard, but when Aries blocks it, he just claws at his face. I like that. There's a cool spot where Aries hits the ropes, but Danielson grabs his leg and does what is essentially a dragon screw leg whip from the ground and locks in a half crab. I think one of the things that I mentioned in the other review that we did for the last match was that in all these matches, Danielson pulls out something that I can't remember seeing before. And that was one of them from this match, was that from the ground dragon screw leg whip. And then at that point, they just go back and forth. I think the story here is that Danielson keeps anticipating Aries' offense and avoids it over and over and over again until you get close to the finish. There is a little bit more sloppiness in this match than you'd ever expect from these 2. I mean, just a little tiny bit because they're so great and their execution is so great. But there's an early monkey flip that Aries gives Danielson that doesn't look that perfect. There's also a spot where Aries can't get his balance on the top rope, so he jumps down to the apron and gets uppercutted, and then Danielson hits a missile drop kick. Like, you don't really see that too often, but in general, they, they're great and they do a lot of cool stuff, and they eventually get into what they usually do, which is the, fighting over finishers. Danielson going for the cattle mutilation. Aries floats on top of him. Aries goes for a backslide, but Danielson's shoulder isn't down, so Aries hits the punt. And then Danielson blocks a brainbuster, so Aries DDTs him and locks in the last chancery. And Danielson gets which is how Aries won the first match. And then Danielson gets a small package, which is how he won the second match. But Aries kicks out and gets the brainbuster and the 450 for the win. I was actually surprised they went with the 450 because they were doing more interesting finishes in the other two matches, but I did think it was an exciting ending sequence. So not quite long enough to be epic, and again, not as good as that first match, but these are two great wrestlers. They know what they're doing. They really built the match into a hot ending. I think this one would have been better if it was just a little longer, but I still thought it was great, and I think the series overall was very good. But like I said, I still think they peaked with that first match.
Albert, what did you think of someone coming into this fresh, unburdened by those previous two matches being in your mind?
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. I think it was apparent to me, and probably both when I first watched it and also when I rewatched it, that it wasn't the match that these two were capable of having, and clearly did have a couple shows earlier. But yeah, I thought it was really good, really fun ending sequence, and I was genuinely surprised that the 450 was the finish. Even just watching today, having been there in the room when it happened, I was surprised that was the finish in a good way. I was actually surprised that Aries won. I didn't remember that. And I was actually caught by surprise by the 19-year-old wrestling match that I watched happen in person. And that was kind of cool. It was it was really good. I could tell, they weren't going, I guess, all the way, all out for this. And I get it also, given place on the card, it wasn't the main event. But definitely really good stuff from two of the greats.
I said Delirious works the same match a lot of the time. I felt like these two guys just worked three matches against each other in a short period of time. And while there was a lot of stylistic overlap in the three, I didn't feel like I was watching the same match three times. Like Matt, you touched on where Brian always in each one of these matches found something new to pull out. So, like all three of their matches had a lot of mat work, but each match had interesting new transitions to get into mat work. They had certain signature moves that they used in all three matches, but each match just had those unique spots that were just there for that one night. Like, there's that moment where they got each other in head scissors at the same time on the mat, and I wrote my notes. There are sex acts that aren't that intimate. Like, it just looked dirty having dual head scissors on each other on the mat at the same time, writhing around. And then
I also know that around that time that Aries said, Prazak said Austin Aries is known for his ability to escape a head scissors, and I was like, that's true. He does do that. It is something that he's good at. I would have not put that fine of a point on it, but I thought that was a cogent note.
Yeah, they had to say that because it happened so often. It was the in-character equivalent of "you can't powerbomb Kidman," but Danielson doing that jumping knee as Aries went through for the heat-seeking missile tope and catching him on the floor midair, I thought was just one of the best spots of the entire show. And Brian even breaks up the airplane spin, which, he rarely used in ROH by this point. So I felt like this match also has a slight difference in tone from the previous two. There's a section in the middle of this match that is different than there are more back and forth matches where for a few minutes of this match straight, it feels like Brian's really putting Aries through it. He's dominating him in a way I don't think quite to a degree he hadn't in the previous two matches, where he's just putting him in submission after submission to the point where when Aries does go back on offense, it doesn't feel like it's just him taking his turn. It actually felt like, he's kind of making a comeback here. And then in the finishing round, we get a lot of counters, which is another trope I feel is overdone in wrestling, but I felt like it was completely earned here at the end of a 3-match series. In fact, the finish of all these matches is all about the wrestlers learning from the previous match because, the first match, Aries puts Brian in the last chancery and beats him with that, makes him submit. And then in the second match, he goes for it again, but when, Brian is able to counter it that time into a small package. And then this time they go through that whole sequence again, except, Aries when Brian goes for the small package, Aries transitions into a brain buster, immediately hits the 450 for the win. So yeah, a very simple story told over the 3 matches. Aries beats Brian with something new in match 1. Brian figures a counter out for match 2, and Aries figures out a counter in match 3. And I agree, Matt. I felt like the first of the 3 matches these guys had was clearly the best of the 3. I would put this right on the border of very good and great. I thought this was right there with the second, like you. This is probably a little more actiony than the previous 2. It's a little shorter, but not by much. I prefer the long mat battle of the first match. This still has enough of that, and this match might please people who aren't into more of the technical wrestling side because it is a little less of that. I feel like a problem creeping to ROH at this point was roster stagnation, where they had at this time a lot of talented wrestlers, but a lot of guys who had been there for a while in similar spots, where when I knew we were about to be revisiting this 3-match series, I was not dreading it, but I was feeling like a bit of malaise where I was like, well, we've seen these guys wrestle a lot on this show. And then rewatching these matches, they turned out to be not only one of the biggest they were like one of the biggest highlights of this entire stretch of shows we've covered recently. And it's a reminder to me that truly great wrestlers have it in them to work each other over and over and find ways to keep it interesting, because not every great wrestler, there are definitely a lot of great wrestlers who, when they work each other again and again, they develop a pattern match. But these guys, I felt like they changed just enough and had grown from their 2004 days enough that I had a lot of fun watching them 3 times in a row in 2007. So it was a pleasant surprise how refreshing it was. I also thought it was funny where Brian got a lot of streamers. And for a second, I was like, why is Brian getting streamers tonight? And then I realized, a lot of fans probably bought streamers for Misawa tonight. And so they probably had extra streamers. And like, we might as well use them for somebody else. And I just wrote in my notes, I would not accept these pity streamers. If you aren't buying the streamers for me, don't toss them for me. I don't want no pity streamers. But anyway, after the match, Dave Prazak says Aries is the number 1 contender and can also brag that he's the ace of ROH now, because that was also apparently what was on the line. They've talked about this before. The title of ace of ROH. It seems like whoever's the world champion should be the one getting to brag that they're the ace of ROH. We will see if this is like the icon of wrestling of ROH thing that was up for grabs in that 2005 match between Punk, Joe, and Homicide, where that was like never mentioned ever again after someone won that incredible honor. Danielson and Aries shake hands. Aries does one of my favorite ROH things after that, which is he cuts a promo into one of the handheld cams. But since ROH used 2 handheld cams, but only used one when they edited the show together, and used the other as a backup in case something went wrong, Aries cut the promo into the handheld cam they don't use, which means you get that classic ROH thing of, we get to watch Aries from the second handheld cam cut a promo into the first handheld cam that we can't hear.
Yes, and we'll never be able to see. Exactly. Yeah. By the way,
it's absolutely perfect.
By the way, the first ever Through the Years t-shirt's coming out soon, and all it says is, Through the Years, I don't want no pity streamers.
that could be used in a variety of things in today's cultural landscape.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Streamers mean something different now than it did perhaps in 2007.
That's right.
Absolutely. We then go to another piece of footage provided by ageofthefall.com, and this is probably I don't know if it's the highlight. We haven't gotten to the Lip Rebel yet, but the Age of the Fall are in another neighborhood of Philly. Jimmy says these buildings were built in a time where architecture might be considered art. But then he points across the street to some more modern cookie-cutter homes. And Jimmy rants about the poor living in these mass-produced homes and says people are getting evicted because of rising rent. Jimmy says you can be an individual and live in one of those old homes, or you can live in one of these nice new cookie-cutter homes. What the fuck is this staple about? It's just everything.
He does not like... Maybe it's secretly a shot at WWE because he's making fun of McMansions.
Ooh, but
do you know that expression, Trevor? The big match?
Yes.
It's like, the cookie cutter homes that come up. So I'm joking, but like that's the only thing I could think of. But yeah, I guess there's a little bit more coherence to what he's talking about here. But like, I'm like, are they socialists? Are they I don't understand what's going on, but I appreciate that Tyler Black is getting some mic time here. It's the first time we've really ever gotten him. And, now look at him now, just yapping away on WWE TV. But I don't understand. I think they were just like, we're going to shoot you in front of these different locations. Come up with something to say.
Matt, I want to ask you this. I just wondering, do you think there's any chance this was intentionally stupid to be like get a heel reaction? Because I think they're being earnest and trying to seem cool.
At least at first they were being earnest and trying to seem cool. I do wonder if by this point they were like, all right, I don't know if this stuff is flying. So maybe let's just be as ridiculous as possible. I mean, I don't know. I mean, has Jimmy commented on it?
I don't know if he's talked about this part. I'm not sure about like the general idea. I think when he talks about, he generally just talks about more like the blood stunt and things like that. I think he was just looking for things that would get reactions, whether it's, Mark tied up in barbed wire or hanging Jay and having him bleed onto him. And these promos kind of feel like I'm just trying to say hot buzzword topics like whatever, women's rights, McMansions, Walmart, gentrification. I'm surprised he didn't start talking about like GMOs at this point. Like just whatever fits in, and don't suggest a solution. Just say it.
I'm just glad that we weren't in the era where people were so obsessed with vaccines and conspiracy theories about vaccines, because I'm afraid he would have started getting into that if it was happening now.
Necro Butcher would be ranting about Fauci ouchies. And you just be like, good God, I got to stop.
But if you're Jimmy Jacobs, and if you were being serious or not, email throughtheyears@gmail.com.
I don't know how Jimmy Jacobs would feel about us, because I think we've been pretty high praise on him on a lot of things, but on some things, maybe not so much. I don't know. I mean,
on this specifically, we haven't praised him that much.
No. Jimmy, if you're listening, go back, listen to the archive. But
isn't it interesting though that in this segment, they're talking about architecture, and later Tyler Black would become the architect in WWE.
This is why you need to be on every episode.
This is where he found his passion.
Yeah, right? Like he was like, that's interesting.
They should have scheduled this so they could have showed up at the Chris Jericho book signing. That, talked about just talked about Barnes and Noble or something. Man, whatever, into the old bookstore.
Borders, which doesn't exist in New York City anymore. Does it exist at all?
It has not existed anywhere, I think, in about 15 years. Yeah.
All right.
That's something that the Age of the Fall could be upset about. It's like we used to have these chains of bookstores, and now we can't even have those anymore.
No more B. Dalton?
And I believe Jericho and Jimmy Jacobs worked very closely together in WWE. Yeah, so
maybe the list was inspired by all the world of
the list of problems in America.
Three of them.
We then go back to the ring where Bobby Cruz says it's time for the main match we've all been waiting for, the main event, at which point Sweet and Sour Incorporated of Larry Sweeney, Chris Hero, Sarah Del Rey, and Bobby Dempsey interrupt. Hero is wearing a shirt that says Survival of the Fittest, referring to his recent win of that tournament. Dempsey is wearing a shirt that says Survivor of the Fattest. Sweeney has a mic and says he knows when to strike when the iron is hot. He says Misawa's match isn't going to happen yet because Hero is next. He puts over Hero beating 6 men in one night recently at Survival of the Fittest. Hero hits Dempsey and Del Rey comforts Bobby immediately, and they continue that. They do that basically every show now, where Dempsey gets some form of physical abuse and Del Rey's like the one person in the stable that kind of has a soft spot for Bobby and is there for him. So Larry says because Hero won Survival of the Fittest, Chris is due a title shot, but Larry added a clause to the contract in the midnight hour when they were writing it up that says Hero gets that title shot whenever and wherever he wants. And guess what? He wants it right now. The crowd pops for this. Sweeney says Nigel needs to come out and either defend the title or forfeit it to Hero. He doesn't care if Misawa has to wait. Hero says, I want to have a moment of silence for the arm and many lariats of Nigel McGimp, which isn't the greatest fake name. He then says Nigel McGimpy arm, which you're getting better, is not injured. He's terrified. He saw Hero beat 6 men single-handedly for the first time ever. He knocked Nigel out in Chicago. He tapped him out in Boston. And if you ask Chris, Nigel's a sorry excuse for champion. Some fans actually clap for this, and we even get a Chris is awesome chant. And at this point, a sad and dejected-looking Nigel McGuinness walks to the ring. Nigel grabs a mic and says he's been doing this for 7 years and nearly killed himself to get to this position. Hero plays the world's smallest violin for him at this point. Nigel says he wants to kill Hero, and Hero's mocking him. Nigel tries to cut a serious promo about how upset he is that he's going to miss the show, similar to the promo he cut before the show away from the fans. When one fan of the crowd, which I assume was not either of you two, shouts, "Wah!" And clearly that fan gets to Nigel because he turns and acknowledges that fan, like really stares, looks for him, and you can tell he's not happy with that. Nigel says he'd like nothing more than to wrestle tonight, but he tore his bicep off the bone, and if he wrestles tonight, there's a chance he'll make it worse to the point where he'll need that surgery, and that would take him out of action for 4 months and be the end of his title reign. Nigel says when he's healthy, when he's okay, he'll put the title on the line against Hero. He knows all his fans in Japan will be watching tonight, and he wants them to know what kind of champion he is, but he can't. Nigel goes to leave, but Sweeney tells Nigel to listen up, you limey. Your contract says you either defend against Hero tonight or you forfeit that title. He tells Nigel it's time to forfeit it right here, right now to Hero, which gets a few boos, but it actually gets way more cheers and a mild sweet and sour chant. Sweeney says if they wrestle, this is what Hero's going to do. Hero attacks Bobby Dempsey's arm at this point. He kicks it. He puts it in an arm bar. Sweeney calls Nigel a coward and a fluke over and over again. Nigel says, is that what Sweeney thinks? Is that what these fans think, that I'm a fluke? Well, I ain't a fluke and I ain't a coward. I don't care if I'm out for 4 months. I'm going to put my title on the line right now. Del Rey walks injured Bobby Dempsey to the back. And before we get to the match, we should talk about this because this is the start of what will become a trend, which I think is one of the ugliest parts of the entire Gabe Sapolsky era of ROH, which is Nigel McGuinness struggling with significant injuries, and not all, but a noticeable segment of the crowd being complete assholes about it. Like, this entire I saw a lot of people, I looked back at the live reports at the time, a lot of people, even some of the people that, like, the newsletter guys based on the live reports were like, oh, this was intended to turn Nigel heel. I watched this. I don't think this at all was intended to turn Nigel heel on this night. I think that happens later. This entire segment was built on paper for Sweet and Sour Incorporated to be seen as cowardly jerks challenging an injured man, and for Nigel to be the valiant hero who eventually is willing to risk everything while hurt to prove himself. But at every stage of this segment, while the reaction, I want to make clear, it wasn't universal, but it did sound like throughout the segment that more fans were on Hero's side than Nigel's side. Like, they did not turn on Nigel during the segment. They were never with him to begin with. And we'll see it more on future shows, and I can go into it more on future shows. But I think Nigel was legitimately bothered by this. Like, even at the end of the promo where after the heckle, he acknowledges that the fans in the building don't believe in him. And then he talks about how he wanted to wrestle tonight to prove himself to his Japanese fans. That almost sounded like a bit of a kiss off. And so, yeah, a really crazy segment. And eventually ROH will pivot based on reactions like this. But I don't think that's what the intended reaction was on this night. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the most memorable part about all this in the match itself is. Like, it takes me back to how uncomfortable I was with all of this at the time. And, like, this is the first night where it was very apparent that the crowd was not being respectful of what Nigel was dealing with. And, you could tell when he was on the mic, he was getting pretty flustered. And tripping over himself and stuff. And clearly the crowd rattled him a bit. Like, I mean, we'll talk about the match in a minute. I'd say by the end of the match, the crowd was mostly on the right side, but like it was, it was just weird and uncomfortable. And that doesn't even go into the discomfort of like them letting him do this when he probably really wasn't clear to wrestle. He had a torn bicep. And then doing things with his other arm that injured the original arm. Like, I don't know if it was a good idea. I also know, like, it was probably very frustrating for Nigel and Gabe to have your champion be so beset by injuries right at the beginning of his reign. So I think they were kind of stuck in a weird spot. I think now things would have gone pretty differently. But yeah, I think the unfortunate thing is like this was very compelling, and what made it very compelling are all of the negative things about wrestling that you just talked about.
Yeah, this was not a double turn, because if this was going to be a double turn, they wouldn't have, like, Gabe wanted Sweet and Sour to be booed more than they were, to the point where
Hero doesn't turn face at all at any point that I can remember.
Yeah, and you've alluded to it earlier, but we will eventually get to a show where they do a segment to try and get Sweet and Sour more heat that is more reprehensible than this even, and than the crowd's behavior here. And Gabe did not want Sweet and Sour getting cheered over Nigel McGuinness at this point. That was not a thing he wanted. So, Albert, what do you think about being part of the crowd for one of the darkest chapters of fan reactions in ROH history, because this crowd does it again the next night?
Yeah, I don't think I maybe picked up on all of that. I don't know if I did at the time and forgot. I certainly didn't necessarily even realize it when I was watching back. But yeah, it's absurd to think that this was supposed to be a double turn. I saw it as nothing other than the injured champion valiantly defending his title and his honor against people who were being real a-holes to him. And I remember going into this, I was, a big Nigel appreciator, if not fan, and I was bummed that he wasn't going to be on these shows. And I guess I was probably happy to see him, albeit in a limited capacity. But yeah, no, I didn't really know that whole context, and that is upsetting. And
yeah, it is one of the grosser things we've seen. Yeah. So this is not usually what the fans are like, but they would be for the next period. So
I don't know about that, but anyway.
What do you think it was about Nigel specifically that drew that type of reaction?
Well, I don't know why they had to be such petulant assholes on. Like, I realize being disappointed that you're not getting a Nigel world title match, but you were still getting Aries versus Danielson and Misawa on the same night. Like,
right.
You could take a hit. There have been times where wrestlers have had to miss ROH shows before for various reasons, even big names. And I don't know why it was such a, like it was clear that it was very real, that this was not an angle, that Nigel really was hurt. And he was saying, like, I can be back in a month if you just let me rest. And the idea that fans were like, no, we don't want you. We demand you wrestle that you don't miss 2 shows. Like, I don't, like, Matt, I know what you're saying. The ROH fans have had moments where they have not covered themselves in glory, but I've never seen them be almost ECW-ish in the heartlessness of, like, fuck you, wrestle for us right now. Like, play minion play. Like, I've never seen them quite be like this.
Yeah, I mean, also there's also just like a mob mentality of, like, when some fans are doing something, other fans are like, oh, this is the cool thing to do, So, like, there's one asshole influences another asshole, influences a bunch more assholes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the RH World title match, and that's Nigel McGuinness, who successfully defends the title, defeating Chris Hero via submission in 9 minutes, 5 seconds when he made Hero tap out to the London dungeon. So, Albert, what'd you think about this? Because very different. Obviously, Nigel is working with some limitations here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess ultimately watching it back, it feels more kind of like an extended angle than a match. But given the limitations, I think they did all they could do. And in general, the show felt very angle heavy. I think in a way that I believe is unusual for RH at this time, but you two would know better than me.
Yeah, it was pretty I would say, I mean, this forced, normally there wouldn't be a big involved angle like this in the semi-main event. And sure. Yeah, I think that was kind of necessitated by that. And yeah, even the Gabe, like all the openings, half of the show leading to the big dive trend, I would say, yeah, that is something Gabe did, but not often. It would come up occasionally and not to that degree. So those two things do make it feel a little bit kind of more chaotic than usual, I would say. So yeah, this was as much as an angle as a match, like you said, Albert, and all the hero stalling and showboating is gone. They're here to tell a very specific story, not to do the usual Chris Hero show. Nigel's working this match in street clothes. He's wearing sneakers, jeans, a t-shirt, rather than his ring gear. So they're really selling the idea that, he didn't expect to wrestle tonight. He took this match on a spur of the moment impulse. And Nigel spends a good chunk of this match selling as Hero works in a way that's clearly designed to protect Nigel. Hero stomps the arm, but generally doesn't do things that could actually hurt it. And this is a match where, while Nigel has to sell a lot, he doesn't have to bump very much. But it's also a match where Nigel actually makes his share of comebacks. It's not just all him on defense. And all his comebacks are one-armed. When Nigel does the Tower of London off the apron to the floor late in the match, he uses his injured arm. But I think other than that spot, everything in this match that he does is with his healthy, non-dominant arm. And there is a problem this match has to solve, though, because, like, you don't want Nigel to lose and drop the title, which clearly didn't want to do that at this point. But they also want to use this match as a setup for a future longer Nigel versus Hero match when Nigel is healthier. So you're thinking, well, how do you come out of this match with Nigel still as champ, but Hero's protected enough to warrant a rematch? And ROH's solution was a convoluted, dusty finish where Hero gets Nigel in an armbar. Nigel struggles from the middle of the ring to the ropes. He eventually puts his leg on one of the ropes, but the referee, Paul Turner, is so busy trying to see if Nigel wants to submit that he doesn't look at the ropes. And after some time of Nigel still being locked in the submission, despite his foot being on the ropes, he finally just gives up and taps out. Paul Turner calls for the bell, but then he immediately turns around and sees Nigel's foot on the ropes. He realizes what happened. He restarts the match very quickly. Nigel makes a big comeback at this point while Hero was celebrating, and Nigel hits the apron Tower of London. He brutalizes Hero's arm by slamming it into the barricade over and over and over again before he makes him tap out to the London dungeon. And I thought Nigel's comeback was really good, but I really didn't like a lot of the rest of this because first, Paul Turner, in an effort to not see Nigel's foot on the ropes, is in a position that no ref is ever in during a submission. He's basically standing over Hero and Nigel on top of them, almost straddling them with his back to the ropes. Like 99% of the time in wrestling, when a wrestler's in a submission, the ref is paying attention to see if a wrestler is going to grab the ropes. And considering that Nigel had just inched himself all the way from the middle of the ring to the edge of the ring, Turner should have been looking for that. And on top of that, does Nigel's mouth not work? How does he not scream, "Ref, my foot is on the ropes. Just turn around and look at the ropes. My foot is on the ropes." All that is really weird to me. And the problem with the other problem with that finish to me is if you want to give Hero the excuse to have the rematch in the fans' eyes, this is not a genuine reason to give Hero a rematch. If you think it's a genuine reason, this has two ways of going with the fans. If the fans think Hero was really screwed, that hurts their intended goal of Nigel being the babyface and Hero being the heel here. If you don't think Hero is screwed, well, then this idea of, oh, you should really want to see a rematch, well, not really. And what this match ends up being is, in a way, Hero loses clean in under 10 minutes to a guy with one arm. So it was them trying to thread the needle here, and you can argue that they did. You can argue that they were a little too cute by half here. The crowd was fascinating during this, though, because at different points during it, I felt like the crowd was 60-40, even 70-30 for Hero. But then, Matt, you were talking about by the end they got more to Nigel. I would say at other points in this match, it felt like it was 50-50 or maybe even a little more like 60-40 in favor of Nigel. So, yeah, they did get him. And early on, there were dueling "Let's go Hero, let's go Nigel" chants, but I would say the Hero chants were a little louder. But then seconds later, you got dueling "Fuck you, Hero, he's our hero" chants, where I'd say the "Fuck you, Hero" chants are a little louder. You know, when Hero tries to put Nigel in the armbar, there's a huge reaction with lots of fans wanting Nigel to tap, but then other fans chanted, "Please don't tap." So no matter what, it was a mixed crowd, and I don't think that was in the intention on this night. You know, Hero and Sweet do not turn face out of this, but I guess my last thought on this was, in some ways, I came away from this thinking maybe the best thing to do this weekend was just not have Nigel show up to the buildings on these two nights, because not enough fans seem to be sympathetic to Nigel's very legitimate plight. And when he talked about wanting to wrestle but not being able to, it seemed to just inflame a portion of the audience that were kind of heartless assholes. So I kind of wonder if Nigel had just sat at home for a month and then come back, maybe the fans wouldn't have been so pissed. Like, just out of sight, out of mind. But I don't know. But what do you think about this, Matt?
Yeah, I don't know if they could have possibly predicted that reaction before this night. You know, the next night maybe, now after they went through this. But I think it was, I don't think they ever probably even considered Nigel not showing up at this point. And yeah, I think that the match was not great. I did find that the dusty finish thing was pretty weird. and unnecessary and probably a little counterproductive. But I do think this was very compelling. The whole thing, like, it was easy to watch in the sense that it was hard to watch, like it was interesting and dynamic. And I don't think it was compelling necessarily for good reasons, but now 19 years later, it was certainly interesting to watch. I don't know if I've ever seen Nigel seem so unconfident, and I'm not sure that if he was acting or if that was a reflection of how he felt. I think probably a little bit of both, but I think if he was acting, he did a great job. The match was, was hot for the time it lasted. The crowd got on the right side by the end, but I do think that, Nigel did a good performance considering what he was dealing with. I think ThROH did the best he could, but it was just a weird situation all around.
Yeah, I think you summed up perfect. Like, compelling, but for the wrong reasons, I think is like a perfect review of this match. So after the match, Nigel gets a good reaction and a round of applause as Larry Sweeney has a temper tantrum. There are a couple boos for Nigel still at this point, but they're drowned out by a loud "Thank you, Nigel" chant. So they did get them on this night at the very end. But we cut to ThROH and Larry Sweeney backstage. They're freaking out. Sweeney threatens lawsuits and says Paul Turner's going to lose his license. ThROH screams, "Foreign object," and says everyone in Philly saw that Nigel tapped out. He's not done. He says he's the canary and Nigel's the coal mine. I thought this was fiery and blustering in an old school way that I quite enjoyed. I enjoyed this as a backstage promo. This was good. This was like almost 80s WWF in a good way. That's
what I was going to say. It reminded me of a post-match loss promo from like Bobby Heenan or Ric Flair, which I like that. That we need to see more of that. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, very fun. So that brings us fine. Oh, Al, did you have anything to say?
No, I was just gonna say it's a lukewarm take, but Larry Sweeney, it's really great. It's great to see him in action in this. I haven't seen any footage of him in quite it's quite some time. I know for you guys, you've been watching him regularly, but the whole act with him and Chris ThROH is really good. So, even though I was kind of meh on that match, I think that should be said.
Yeah, there's always room for more Chris ThROH praise Larry Sweeney praise on this podcast. So that brings us to the main event, the long-awaited main event. Kenta and Mitsuharu Misawa actually, they didn't defeat. They went to a 30-minute time limit draw with Naomichi Marufuji and Takeshi Morishima. So I think to give us some background first, it's been interesting to see the evolution of Japanese stars in ROH over time, because while there were Japanese names that came in as early as ROH's first year in 2002, I really think the first major signpost in ROH's history with Japanese stars was when Great Muta came in at Final Battle 2003. In a tag match, I felt like Muta gave on that night a good B+ performance where he hit his signature moves, he gave a decent effort, and then they sent the fans home happy. Then the next year, you had Jushin Liger come in. I would say he did the same thing where he gave a good B+ performances over 2 nights where he didn't work 100%, but I'd say he gave you 80, 85%. He played the hits, and the ROH fans were very happy with that. But then Kenta Kobashi came in 2005, and even though, his knees were shot and his style was somewhat modified by that point, he was still capable of something special. And against Samoa Joe, he gave 100%. He had one of the most legendary matches in the history of ROH. And after that, I felt like things changed because we started getting waves of younger Japanese talent who were not old enough to have that legendary status like Muta, like Liger, like Kobashi, but they were healthy enough and hungry enough to go all out most nights, like, Kenta, Marufuji, Morishima, the Dragon Gate guys. And so here in 2007, what I was really interested to see was, with the previous 2 years of the younger Noah and Dragon Gate guys, where ROH fans had been kind of spoiled by what Japanese wrestlers would deliver them, would they be happy going back to the old early ROH days of the old legend who isn't going to give you an absolute peak performance? And then adding to that, what made me even more intrigued by this was Misawa is in rougher shape here than any of those other Japanese legends that had previously worked in ROH. Like, yes, Kobashi's knees were shot when he wrestled, but he could still summon a top-level match when he demanded his body to do it. Muta's knees were shot too by 2003, but at that time, he wasn't that far removed from that early 2000s run in All Japan that was kind of seen as a second wind for his career. Liger in 2004 maybe wasn't peak early 90s Liger, but Liger had this consistent level of quality and craftsmanship that lasted basically his entire career, that stretched well beyond 2004. Misawa in 2007, for those who aren't going to watch this match, He wasn't any of those guys. In 2007, Misawa was 45 years old. He was physically broken down. We're like you mentioned earlier, Matt, we're talking about a guy that was less than 2 years away from the day of this match from dying in the ring. A guy who, like I said, had written a note around this time saying, like, in the case I die in the ring, give this note to console whoever is facing me at that point. A guy who around this time was talking about how he wanted to retire, but felt like he had to keep wrestling because his promotion, Noah, was in a business decline, had not been able to create a replacement for him and Kobashi. And then with Kobashi suffering cancer, had to put himself back in the world title picture. And on top of all that, if that isn't bad enough, Misawa was wrestling with something else during this weekend. I will go to Gabe Sapolsky, who wrote in his MySpace blog right after Misawa died. He wrote this about this weekend. Gabe wrote, when Misawa came to ROH and he only did the Glory by Honor weekend because he wanted to, he battled through a bad case of the flu to put on 2 great matches because he did not want to disappoint the fans. I actually felt terrible for Misawa that weekend because the trip to Philly and Manhattan was something he was looking forward to, but I don't think he enjoyed it that much since he was so sick. He still gave it his all to make sure the fans saw him at his best. That speaks volumes on his character. So yeah, on top of everything else, he got sick this weekend. And if you watch this match, you can tell Misawa is significantly diminished from his peak. I always say 1990s All Japan is, in my opinion, the best wrestling of all time, my favorite. And while I was always more of a Kawada man, Misawa was the biggest and most celebrated star of that promotion in that era. I talk about how while different wrestlers age differently, there's this common cycle for many wrestlers where at first they're able to wrestle 100% of their peak potential every night. Then they get to a stage of the career where they're able to work at 100%, but only on some nights. And then, they save those nights for special matches. And then there's that stage where even if they try to give 100%, they can't, even on their most important nights. And Misawa in 2007 was at that level where he could be in good matches at this point, but even when he was giving maximum effort, he wasn't going to be able to reach the heights of when he was younger. He couldn't be peak Misawa ever anymore. And you watch him here, he's heavier, he's slower. At times, even facially, he looks 5 to 10 years older than he actually is. But if you watch this match, I don't think you really learn what 2007 Misawa is capable of, because this match works hard to protect him. Like, whenever Misawa tags in, he's always 1 to 2 minutes away from tagging back out. The majority of his offense in this match is elbow strikes, and most of those are standing ones that allow him to stay stationary in the center of the ring. He does give the crowd 1 tiger driver to pop for amid a handful of other moves, but it's mostly elbow stuff here. And he does take some bumps in this match, but most are pretty safe and simple, with the only major bump he takes being a backdrop driver from Morishima. And to be clear, I don't blame Misawa for working the match this way, knowing his condition, knowing he had the flu, but it is just a fact that in ROH, we had never seen a legend come in and do less than Misawa did on this night and be as compromised physically as Misawa was here. Like, I would describe this match as Misawa doing just enough for you, the paying fan, to not feel ripped off. Like, you still feel like, okay, I saw Misawa do his thing, kind of. And for some reason in this match, Morishima works as little as Misawa, perhaps less. Like, Kenta and Marufuji carry most of this 30-minute match, and not just with the amount of ring time they have, but the energy they bring to it. Misawa is over as a legend. He gets, the biggest reactions of the entire night, and the crowd goes crazy for him to start the match. They don't quite treat him at the level of Kobashi, but this match has, and this match, like, it has nowhere close to the nonstop heat of the Joe Kobashi match. But then again, this match isn't close to the quality of the Joe Kobashi match. But the first time Misawa tags in, the fans go nuts for simple stuff like his elbows. But when they realize that that's most of what Misawa's going to do tonight, they still treat him like a legend the rest of the match, and they give him good reactions, but they never give him that early match reaction ever again during the rest of the half hour. It's like they kind of realize, oh, okay, Misawa's at this level. I would say the work is decent. I call this maybe a 3.25 star match, a good match. There are moments and sequences in this match that are better than that. Like, the very limited interactions Kenta and Morishima have are a highlight for me. I think there's a way those two match up, like the tiny ass kicker versus the giant monster, that is really interesting, and they mesh really well together. I wish we had seen more of that. But there's also a noticeable mid-match lull as the match builds to the 30-minute time limit. And as it builds to that end, you realize, oh, this is setting up to end with Misawa tagging in one more time and having a final exchange with Morishima. And they give you that, but they give you that with almost no time left, and they do very little, which was disappointing. I think we'll get to, but I think Dave Meltzer says in The Observer, the end of this match was supposed to be 2 minutes of Morishima and Misawa just throwing bombs at each other. And Misawa was so tired by the end of the match, they had to I can't do much. I have to just do a little bit. So I can talk a bit more, but I've already rattled on way too much. But Matt, what'd you think about this match?
I'd say I don't know if I totally agree with you that Misawa did less than any other legend that we've seen in ROH. I don't know that I would say he did less than Keiji Muto did at Final Battle 2003. If for no other reason than this match was just so much longer than that one. And so he had no choice but to be in more and do, he's even with the limited amount that he was able to do. I do think he was pretty well protected here. I think you're right that the highlight segments are Kenta and Morishima, with the kicks and throwing the bombs and stuff like that. And I think Marufuji was definitely the glue for this match. I think there was a pretty decent Kenta versus Marufuji match buried within this tag team match. I think there was some fun segments like when Morishima stood on Kenta's chest in the corner and then Marufuji got on top of Morishima while Morishima was standing on Kenta's chest. But it was also very noticeable that during that sequence, Kenta's tag team partner Misawa did absolutely nothing. So that did make Misawa's limitations stand out a little bit. But I would say overall, I liked the match more than I remembered liking it. I don't think it was much better than what you said it was, but I thought it was pretty enjoyable. It did slow down, but I think that the other three guys in the match were strong enough that they kept it pretty entertaining for the whole match. And I don't really feel like the match, like I don't really think I felt like shortchanged by the fact that it went to a draw. Like I don't think it was important for this match to have a winner, and ROH just establishes that draws are acceptable finishes sometimes. Obviously, this was more of a political draw. Like they didn't want to pin anybody, rather than like with Joe and Punk, where like those draws actually built to something. But still, I didn't mind it. I didn't think the match would have the quality of the match would have changed significantly if it had a decisive winner. So I think it's fine. Yeah, I thought it was entertaining for a 30-minute match. I thought it was good. It definitely wasn't great, but I think it went down pretty easy considering the length.
Albert, what'd you think? You got the live Misawa experience. You got another bragging right along with all your PWG shows.
Yeah, I think going into it, even though I was not, the most well-versed on, Misawa's legacy, I certainly knew his stature, and I was excited to see a legendary figure like that. But I also knew enough that my expectations were pretty well managed. I don't remember being disappointed in what he did. I think it was about what I thought to expect at the time. And yeah, it was obviously very cool to see him, but I think I was probably just excited to see everyone else in the match, especially Kenta, who obviously was, super hot at the time. And I had seen super hot both wrestling wise and, I mean, honestly, looks wise. He's a handsome guy to this day. And, I'd seen him obviously before in Ring of Honor, and I was excited to see him again, excited to see Morishima and Marufuji for the first time live. So yeah, I mean, it was fun. It was tough watching it back a little bit, knowing that it was a 30-minute draw. Kind of affected my excitement of watching it back. But yeah, definitely was a novelty, and yeah, it was it was a solid match, and it wasn't anything super memorable other than the people who were in it.
I will say one thing that hurt my enjoyment a little is knowing Misawa's fate, because
sure,
it's one thing to watch a broken down wrestler, have to pace himself and stuff, but you feel more, I guess, guilt watching him, knowing that like how bad a state he's actually in, knowing like how dire things were about to become for him. I almost felt guilty. Like I want just to say, man, you don't have to do this. I'm sorry, man. Like you can take a break, and it just. So it is kind of weird watching back that, but I completely understand why they did everything the way they did, because I remember at the time when they announced the matches for this weekend, ROH had found this good formula with both Kobashi and Liger, where they would do 2 nights of matches, which they did on this weekend, and the first night one of the nights it would be the Japanese legend versus one of the top ROH names in a dream match. And then the next night, those two guys would rematch in a tag match with two more Ring of Honor guys as their partners. And I was expecting that to go back to that formula. And I remember when they announced, oh, it's going to be all Noah guys for both nights. I was like, man, you couldn't get Danielson in a tag match or something. And I was disappointed. But then when I watched these matches and knowing everything Misawa was going through, I completely understand why he would just want people he trusted, you know, in every sense of the word, to like, these are the guys that are going to get me to a good match. These guys are going to take care of me. You know, I know what we're going to be able to deliver. And I completely get why why Noah would have gone out of their way to suggest, like, this is what we want. You know, we're going to give you these two matches. And I probably would have been a lot more snarky at the time. And I completely understand now. But,
and you know what's funny is that you know, when we talk about everything old is new again, just 2 weeks ago, Marufuji and Kenta had a match for the GHC national title at Karaoke Hall, and it got a 6.63 on Cage Match.
Yeah, well, those guys are not to be too morbid, those guys are hurting too. You know, I mean, hopefully they've learned a lesson of knowing when to say it's time to stop, because a lot of those All Japan Noah guys ran themselves ragged. But we go to the Observer. Dave Meltzer wrote before this match took place, Misawa isn't going to do much in a U.S. ring, but it'll be interesting how ROH fans take to him, since he's a genuine legend, and those fans are usually very kind to legends. When Kaiji Muto went there Dave wrote this wrong. When Kaiji Muto went there a few years ago, he didn't do much, but he not only was over huge in the building, but actually drew the largest crowd up to that point in company history. Muta had at least had his few cool moves like the power elbow, dragon screw, and shining wizard that were going to get pops, and he has some facial expressions. He also, for a U.S. crowd, has more of a star presence. Misawa actually has no star presence and never did, but he was a star because he was promoted as the top guy and had some of the greatest matches in history before injuries took their toll. Misawa
sorry to interrupt, but you know, it's funny to like have Dave, because Dave talks about this a lot, but like, and obviously I know what he means, but it's funny when to talk about the assets of Kaiji Muto, he goes, he has some facial expressions.
Yeah,
like his face is not paralyzed. But yes, I know that Misawa is famously like stoic. I do understand this.
Although Misawa does have more facial expressions than Liger did. So
yes.
So Dave continues, Misawa has worked on indies a few times in Northern California and never done much, but the few hundred fans always treated him like he was a legend, and it didn't seem to make much difference that he really wasn't doing anything. And then when the match happens, Dave wrote in The Observer, in Philadelphia, Misawa and Kenta went to a 30-minute draw with Takeshi Morishima and Naomichi Marufuji in the main event. Kenta, said to be the MVP of the weekend, carried most of the match with Marufuji, his best opponent. The match was designed for those two to make hot tags out with Misawa and Morishima, who would do 2 hard minutes at the end, nailing each other with forearms. However, Misawa was so gassed for his hot tag that the match ended flat, even though the crowd was going wild and very forgiving for him. Most reports had the match between 3.5 and 4 stars. So, you know what? This is the part I felt sad for Misawa. There's a moment where Misawa has an opponent in a chin lock, and he distracts the ref, like he tells the ref to look over somewhere, and he then elbows his opponent in the top of the head while he's got him in the chin lock, and he does this adorable little shh to the crowd, and no one reacts to it. And it's like, man, Misawa's being like coy and playful with you, and you don't even react to it. Like, Misawa doesn't give that to you often. You should be into it. He's giving you the shh, and then Kenta, I think, does it later. Kenta or Marufuji, one of them does it later back. And again, no one's picking up on it, but that was a little sad for me. But otherwise,
pearls before swine.
Immediately after the time limit is announced as expiring, the crowd boos and chants 5 more minutes. Some fans start a Noah chant, but that quickly gets taken over by a brief bullshit chant, followed by a round of applause and a Misawa chant. So in that very brief minute, you get to hear the fans go through the 5 stages of time limit draw grief, where they get all the way to acceptance pretty quickly. And yeah, we end with the real main event, which is we get one more clip provided by ageofthefall.com. Yeah. The Age of the Fall are looking at the Liberty Bell from a distance. They say it's because they're looking from a distance because you now have to pay to get in. What was once part of a revolution is now a tourist trap. Now, bear in mind, The Age of the Fall are talking about tourist traps where they spent this entire show visiting various like neighborhoods and landmarks in Philly, aka being tourists. Tyler blasts us. Is that freedom? Is that what America's got to offer? Black says it's not what the Age of the Fall has got to offer. They're offering the right to imagine, to think, to believe. And then he gives this very earnest voice that just made me laugh. He goes, "Remember what that was like?" Like, remember what it was like to believe, kids? He goes, "It's been so long." Jimmy says, they're not taking our money, but in the end, we might have to do a little thinking. We might have to make a little sacrifice. But in the end, the payoff is much more than a tourist trap. And then we close out with Necro Butcher looking stoned out of his mind, barely able to keep his eyes open, a goofy expression on his face, pointing to his head like, "Yeah, you got to use your head." And that is the end of the show. It is interesting that Jimmy Jacobs said that, the Age of Fall don't ask you to pay on a DVD where if you want to hear his promo, you would have to buy the DVD. So anyway, what is the stable about? Matt, who wins the Man Trophy for today?
I'm going to throw a curveball at you, Trevor. First time ever. I am not giving the Madoff Trophy to the crowd in the building in Philadelphia that night, but I am giving the Madoff Trophy to the sights and sounds of the streets of the city of Philadelphia. It gave a backdrop to some of the most memorable segments that we've seen on an ROH DVD in a long time. Probably the most memorable part of this DVD. It was just, it allowed these young men to wax poetic about the ills of society and what could be and what may eventually be again if we really just take action instead of sit idly by like sheeple. So the city of Philadelphia gets the Madoff Trophy. And I hope they display it right next to the Liberty Bell.
You know what I'm going to do, guys?
Matt, is it fair to say that when you hear the term Streets of Philadelphia now, you'll no longer think of the song by your favorite singer, but you'll think of these Age of the Fall promos?
Yes. Unequivocally, yes.
Matt, are you going to imagine tonight? Are you going to do a little thinking for yourself tonight? For once?
No. Unequivocally, no.
Okay. That caught me off guard. Albert, what'd you think of the show as a whole?
Yeah, I'll separate it into the live experience 19 years ago. I think I had a great time. I think I was just thrilled to be seeing some non-WWE live wrestling with my great pal and traveling to the big city and hanging out and seeing all these guys chant, which didn't exist then, but I'm doing it in my head right now. I think, I was only positive about it. Watching back, it feels probably like a more of a minor show from this time, despite obviously the star power in the main event. I don't know. You tell me if that's fair or not. A lot of it kind of felt like setting up and building to the second night show at the Manhattan Center. But still was fun to watch back and hit some good notes of nostalgia for me. Especially like seeing this era of guys like Kevin Steen and El Generico, who, speaking of time being a flat circle, I believe were heavily involved in the main event angle of WWE SmackDown 2 days ago. And so it was fun. I'm sure that nostalgia has hit the same for you too if you're watching this stuff all the time, which I get. But pleasant all around, but nothing essential, I'd say.
Matt, what did you think? We got the well-adjusted normal wrestling fan, and what's the jaded lifer think about it?
Yeah, well, Albert, obviously, as you know, like the reason we do this show at all is because of the nostalgia really hits for us. But I thought this was didn't have like great peaks. It also didn't have really big valleys like the bitter end did. I thought this was a show that went down pretty easy. It wasn't a great show by any means, but it was entertaining the whole way through, which I think speaks to a pretty good baseline of quality for ROH during this level, during this era. I mean, probably the worst thing on the show was these ridiculous insipid Age of the Fall promos, but like also they were funny enough that they earned the City of the Bad F trophy, which is going to be displayed right next to the Liberty Bell forevermore. So even those had their value. I enjoyed the show. I think the best match was definitely Danielson versus Aries. I think there was some elements to the show that were like, I guess really the value of the show was the crowd reaction to Nigel McGuinness. But, as I said before, like watching it now, like it was entertaining. Like there was some compelling aspects to that segment too. So I enjoyed the watch and it gave some interesting things to talk about. And I'm looking forward to seeing part 2.
Yeah, I like the show. Albert, you were kind of wondering where this kind of stood in terms of importance. And I feel like the show ended up feeling like what it was, which is the B show on a major weekend for ROH, where it did feel like important and big, but it felt like the Friday night version of it, where technically you got to see the first Misawa match in ROH, even though it's not the bigger of the two matches. You got Nigel wrestle. Nigel won't wrestle the next night. You got kind of an interesting development there. You got the end of the Aries Bryan series, which isn't as big as maybe Bryan and Morishima, which fans would get the next night. But it was like you got a fair bit for your dollar on this night in terms of noteworthy things. And I mean, there's been better cards from top to bottom by wrestling, but I think I agree with you, Matt, where this was an interesting show. This show was not a bad show, but it was even more interesting than the quality of the product within. It was those Age of the Fall things. Are they good? No, but they're interesting. Was the Nigel Hero Hall segment good? No, like you said, Matt, it was at times uncomfortable, but it was also interesting. And, the Misawa match, it was at times I was uncomfortable, but it was a good, not great match, but it was also an interesting kind of historical footnote in his career. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things like that on this show. So I would say interesting show, maybe more for the people, especially that are probably listening to an ROH podcast, that are fans enough of the company that they're into not just match quality, but like the weird minutia and the historical significance of things. So with that, we get into plugs. Albert, I never know, you are a respectable human being, so unlike many of our guests. So I don't know if you have anything you want to plug to our audience, who I think is respectable, but you can't be sure. So is there anything you'd like to plug or not? It's up to you.
I've got a couple things. Number one, I'd like to plug the fact that the URL ageofthefall.com is currently available. I looked it up during this recording. It could be someone's for as low as $11.28 a year. So I'm just saying it's out there. It's not redirecting to anything. It's completely up for grabs. And you'd get at least 4 on-screen plugs for your website if you watch Glory by Honor 6 Night 1. So that's pretty intriguing. And my second thing, it's not a plug, but it's something that's a little trip down memory lane that I'd like to quickly regale you both with. The last time I was on, I excavated an email that Matt sent me in advance of my trip to New York for the bitter end. And it was a very nice email where he offered to, not offered, but told me that it might be cold and that I should keep that in mind when I'm packing and bring some extra layers. And I found a snippet of a Gmail chat between me and Matt on Monday, October 29th, 2007. So 4 days before this show and before my arrival on the East Coast. And I'm just going to read it real quickly because I think it kind of foreshadows the future a little bit.
Oh my God.
Albert, I want you to DVR Impact so we can watch it together Thursday night. Matt, and give it the B&V treatment? Albert, yeah, we can record ourselves. Matt, I don't have a mic, frowny face. Albert, I'll bring my laptop. Matt, oh, nice. All right, I'll do that. Remind me when I'm home. Albert, sweet. Justin will listen to it. Matt, Hobbs for sure. Albert, oh yeah, do you have any old blues music? Matt, don't you think if we're going to do that, we might as well review the ROH weekend too? Albert, yeah, and SmackDown. Matt, I'm going to say no on SmackDown. Albert, I don't know. Batista Undertaker is a hot feud. So while we did not record or review that ROH weekend in real time on that weekend in 2007, here we are 19 years later, finally making good on that promise. And of course, with you, Trevor, who was mentioned in that exchange.
Yes.
So if we want to talk about time being a flat circle, just yesterday I was at a music festival headlined by LCD Sound System and The Strokes. I've seen enough. Welcome back, 2007.
That is amazing, and I'm glad to know. It turns out I was Matt's second choice to do an ROH podcast. That's good to know. I was the fallback.
I was kind of forcing it on.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that exchange, Trevor.
Yeah. Matt, all I heard was once it was Albert first. It's a blind rage.
Okay.
No, but that's amazing. And
do we want 2007 back? In a lot of ways, it was better. In other ways, it was the year before a global financial collapse. But I mean, things aren't going so great now. So
I would say you have good reasons to be selfish and prefer today, Matt. I would take 2007 in a second for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Let me do it again. I can do it better this time, please. But what a time. What an age. So and what a great guest. I gotta say, Albert, you are like the anti-Joe Gagney. It just feels good. You just feel good to have you in the background. He sucks joy. You give it. You give birth to it.
I'm sure that's not true.
Having you here. Spend some time with Joe Gagney. So that
I have, and for the record, Joe is a lovely, lovely man.
So next time on the show, we will be covering, it's almost like we do these things sequentially, Glory by Honor 6, Night 2, the bigger night of the weekend. Misawa takes on Kenta in what some people have called the last great match of Misawa's career. Morishima and Aries Danielson renew their incredible feud with another match. Nigel McGuinness takes on the crowd yet again, and it is the only Ring of Honor show that I am aware of that Nicolas Cage and Darren Aronofsky attended. So we'll get to talk about all that and a lot more next time on Through the Years. So until then, till next time, have a good time. Have a great time.